Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Under the buzzing neon lights, Walmart's huge exterior looked as if it were harboring secrets beneath its expansive parking lot. The night was thick with humidity and tension, and a heavy storm brewed overhead. The flickering street lamps cast eerie shadows that danced across the deserted lot as a lone security guard, Marcus, patrolled in silence. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights inside the store seemed to whisper warnings of uncanny events. Marcus had taken the night shift before, but this was different. The store, always a hive of activity during the day, now lay abandoned, save for a few employees finishing up tasks and restocking shelves. However, a foreboding sense of wrongness permeated every aisle and corner. Somewhere deep in the mechanical heartbeat of the Walmart, something malevolent stirred. At precisely midnight, Marcus was making his rounds near the back storage entrance. He remembered the whispered rumors of a ghost shift, tales passed between night workers about strange noises, fleeting reflections in the darkened corridors, and unexplained cold spots. He never paid them much heed, dismissing them as the product of imagination in isolation. Yet tonight, the creeping dread in his gut was tangible. "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice echoed through the empty aisle as he passed rows of unsold merchandise. The hum of the overhead lights was the only answer, until a sudden crashing noise from the far corner jerked him to attention. Marcus reached for his radio, his fingers trembling slightly as he spoke into it. "Control, do we have any sound disturbances out in aisle 12? Static was the only reply at first. Then a distorted voice came through. Don't go there, leave." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Marcus with a pit of dread in his stomach. Unsure whether to follow up or to disregard it as interference, Marcus picked up his pace. In the murk of the store, the magnetic hum of machines and the tapping of raindrops on the expansive roof combined into a dissonant symphony of horror. In the break room, a young cashier named Lila sat hunched over a cup of stale coffee, eyes wide with anxiety. The day had been uneventful, but the night had taken on an ominous tone. Earlier, while restocking a shelf near the seasonal display, she'd overheard two co-workers speaking in hushed tones about strange accidents that plagued late shifts. Voices murmuring in dark corners, unseen figures darting between aisles. And now, as she sat in the oppressive silence of the break room, the smell of something burnt mingled with the coldness she felt creeping along her spine. Across the store, a seasoned manager named Jerome tried to steady his nerves as he made his final rounds. He prided himself on keeping a cool head, but as he passed by a section of randomly arranged merchandise near the loading dock, Jerome felt as if he was being watched. His eyes met a pair of glistening orbs in the reflection of a polished surface that did not belong to any living thing. The eyes disappeared too quickly for him to intervene, replaced by the oppressive shadows that seemed to shift in time with the flickering lights. Unbeknownst to the rest of the staff, hidden behind a row of outdated televisions in the electronics section, a figure emerged from the flickering screens. A young man, disheveled and haunted by sleepless nights, had taken refuge here to escape a personal hell. His name was Ethan, and though he'd only been employed for a few weeks, his life already felt overshadowed by inexplicable terror. All through the day, Ethan had sensed that something was wrong, an intangible presence that darkened his thoughts and cast a pall over his nervous energy. Now, under the trembling watch of the monitors, that presence coalesced into a shape, barely human in proportion yet disturbingly defined, its eyes reflecting a mixture of malice and sorrow. A cold, whispering wind swept through the aisle, chilling Ethan to the bone. It was as though invisible hands had reached out from the darkness to caress him, a gentle, mocking touch that was anything but benign. The ghostly figure stepped forward, its presence impossible in the stark fluorescent light. "Please, help me," the apparition moaned, voice layered with centuries of anguish. Ethan's heart raced. He wanted to run, but his feet were glued to the spot. The figure melted away like mist, leaving only an echo of desolation in the sterile environment. At that moment, a piercing scream shattered the uneasy quiet from the front of the store. Lila's coffee cup rattled off its saucer as she bolted from the break room, her pulse pounding as she made her way toward the source of the cry. The sound came from near the customer service counter, where a middle-aged employee named Carl was trying to calm an elderly shopper who had locked herself in a storage closet. The door had inexplicably jammed as if something from within was trying to prevent her exit.
Leave me alone! You're scaring me!
The woman cried, her voice cracking in panic. Carl's face was drawn tight with a mixture of anger and fear. "Ma'am, please remain calm. I'll get someone to help you out," the woman replied, voice trembling. "Don't come too close. They're coming. They're coming." Before Carl could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging the area into near darkness. In that brief moment, a shape could be seen moving in the gloom, a gaunt silhouette with elongated arms reaching toward the tremulous figure of the frightened woman. As Lila raced through the corridors, she encountered Jerome making his way slowly toward the same area, flashlight in hand. "Lila, get back!" he warned in a strained whisper. His usual authoritative tone was lost amid the terror that had gripped him. "Something's off tonight. I can feel it." "No, we have to help her," Lila insisted, eyes wide with fear and determination. They pushed forward with trembling determination. Meanwhile, Marcus arrived at the aisle near the storage area and attempted to call for backup on his radio once more. But instead of clear static, all that came back was a series of faint, desperate whispers. "Behind you. Behind you." Marcus swung around, his flashlight frantically sweeping across the aisle, only to find emptiness. Yet the sense of being followed clung to him like a second skin. In the parking lot, where the storm was now unleashing torrents of rain, a lone figure hovered near a car. It was an older man, Mr. Hastings, who had been working the night shift at the maintenance department. Mr. Hastings had always respected the building's solemn silence at night, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. As he moved towards the back door to investigate the creeping puddles of frost that seemed impossible in the warm summer night, he noticed his reflection in the glossy glass of the door. For just a moment, standing close by was a figure in his own image, only with hollow eyes and an empty expression. The double faded with a sudden jolt, leaving Hastings with a sickening certainty that what he saw was not a trick of the light, but an omen. Back inside, as chaos began to build, Ethan's earlier encounter haunted his every step. He gathered his courage, stepping cautiously towards the customer service area. The flicker of a computer monitor revealed a distorted reflection in the dark, the distorted face of someone who wasn't there even moments ago. "It's not supposed to be here," Ethan murmured under his breath. The ghostly figure of a young woman, her eyes pleading and lips parting in silent sobs, appeared before him. "You must remember us," she whispered, her voice echoing with lost memories. "We are the forgotten souls of this place." Ethan's skin prickled with a chill as if ice were running through his veins, and he instinctively reached out toward her, only to have his hand pass through a haze of sorrow and despair. In another part of the store, Carl had finally managed to free the terrified elderly shopper. The woman stumbled out, still muttering about voices and curses that had haunted her. They said it's here, the ones that weren't supposed to leave," she croaked before collapsing into Carl's arms. Alarmed, Carl radioed for additional help, but the machine repeatedly spat out garbled static that sounded almost like distant, hollow laughter. The power flickered again, and the oppressive darkness swallowed entire sections of the Walmart. Jerome, Lila, and Marcus huddled together near a corner piled with seasonal goods. "Do you think it's just our minds playing tricks on us?" Jerome asked, his voice barely audible over the rising din of the storm outside and the unnerving whispers seeping through the walls. Lila's eyes darted around the dimly lit aisle, searching for any sign of movement, while Marcus clutched his radio like a lifeline. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but we're not alone in here. I can feel it." As they spoke, the fluorescent lights buzzed erratically, casting fleeting glimpses of shapes that shouldn't exist. Rooms that extended impossibly, corridors that twisted in unnatural angles, and shadows that moved with a life of their own. The building itself seemed to defy the laws of reality. In the distance, a cacophonous clatter echoed, and an indescribable ragged breathing sound filled the air. It was as if the very walls of the store were alive, groaning under the weight of ancient memories and untold horrors. Ethan rejoined the group at that point, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a bizarre sense of resignation. "I saw her," he said, voice low and tremulous, "a young woman who appeared out of nowhere. She said that we must remember, that we must not forget what happened here long ago." Jerome frowned, his mind racing. What could she possibly mean? He asked, only half expecting an answer. In a broken whisper that resonated with both sadness and fury, Ethan replied, "This place, it was built upon tragedy. Each night, the souls of those who suffered here come back to demand recognition." The revelations struck the group like a physical blow. Marcus recalled murmurs from long-forgotten news reports about an old warehouse demolished years ago where a fire had claimed the lives of dozens in a catastrophic accident. Rumors had always swirled that some of the victims had been in cahoots with local labor unions, that their voices had been silenced to cover up corporate malpractice. Over time, the memory of that night had gradually dissolved into oblivion as Walmart had risen on the very grounds where sorrow once reigned. Now, it seemed, the past was clawing its way back. Outside, the storm reached its crescendo, sending ripples of water that blurred the lines between earth and sky. The building shuddered as if punctuated by a deep, resonant sigh. Lila could hardly breathe. Every instinct in her body screamed to flee. "We need to get out," she pleaded. "Something is not right. This isn't a simple power outage or technical glitch. It's something darker." Before any of them could decide on a course of action, a loud, echoing bang reverberated through the entire structure. The massive front doors swung open with a force that belied the quiet that had settled over the Walmart just moments before. A monstrous, formless shadow poured inside, sweeping through the aisles as if searching for someone or something. In that moment, the store transformed into a maelstrom of terror. Items began to fall off shelves, and the once bright, orderly aisles were thrown into disarray by the unpredictable gale of supernatural force. Jerome barked orders, "Everyone, follow me. Head for the emergency exit at the back." The group scrambled through the chaos, dodging debris and the intangible, clawing sensation that threatened to pull them into the darkness. Each step was laden with the weight of a past not forgotten and a present that was rapidly collapsing into pandemonium. As they surged toward the back of the store, Ethan, Lila, Marcus, and Jerome found themselves separated. Ethan turned a corner and came face to face with a tall figure clad in a tattered uniform that seemed to emanate an oppressive cold. Its eyes were empty voids, and its long, skeletal fingers beckoned him closer. "Remember us," it intoned, voice dripping with centuries of despair. "We have been waiting, and now you must bear the burden of our silence." Ethan's scream was swallowed by the roaring wind as the figure lunged, its arms stretching impossibly wide. He dodged narrowly, his mind blank with sheer terror, and bolted down a side corridor that twisted into an endless labyrinth. Meanwhile, Jerome and Lila pressed forward with Marcus, their progress hampered by the slowly morphing interior of the Walmart. Wall panels shifted, and the aisles contorted into nightmarish angles, disorienting them further. As they reached a service stairwell, a low moan echoed from below. Hesitantly, Marcus shined his flashlight down the stairs, revealing a long corridor bathed in dim, pulsating red light. "We have to go down there," Jerome said, his voice resolute despite his terror. "The power might be cut off, but at least we'll have a way out." The corridor was lined with old stock and forgotten inventory, a relic of a bygone era. Here, the specters of the past prowled freely, shattered remnants of lives lost in a catastrophic blaze. The red glow pulsed like the heartbeat of the building, and with each step, Jerome felt the weight of unseen eyes scrutinizing his every movement. Every sound, each creak, each whisper became a harbinger of doom. Back near the service elevator, Lila found herself alone. The intermittent illumination made it difficult to discern friend from foe. She was trapped between flickering realities, and all around her, spectral figures emerged from the darkness. "I'm so sorry," one small translucent child whispered, drifting past her like a forgotten memory. "We're all so lost." The sorrow in the child's voice was both heart-wrenching and paralyzing. Lila's legs buckled as she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by grief and terror. In a final desperate bid to reunite, Marcus searched frantically for his colleagues. The radio in his hand crackled with static until a frantic voice broke through. "Marcus, over by the electronics. Help! I'm trapped." Recognizing it as Ethan's, Marcus raced through the maze-like corridors, following the disembodied cries through twisting halls where the logic of space had ceased to exist. At the electronics section, amidst the flicker of malfunctioning screens, Ethan was cornered by an unseen force. The monitors displayed grotesque images of burning faces and distorted figures, as if the device itself had become a window into the abyss. "Marcus, please." Ethan's voice was raw with fear. "They want me to remember. I can't." Before he could finish, a spectral hand, long and icy, emerged from one of the screens, stretching towards him with inhuman intent. Marcus jumped between them, shouting, "Get away!" as he pulled Ethan aside. The hand recoiled, its form dissolving back into static, but the threat remained undeniably present. Meanwhile, Jerome led a small group down the red-lit corridor, each step bringing them closer to what they hoped would be an exit. The oppressive atmosphere mounted as groans and pleading whispers swirled around them. "We need to keep moving," Jerome urged, his voice echoing with both determination and palpable fear. As they reached the end of the corridor, a heavy door loomed ahead, its surface scratched with names and dates that spoke of long-forgotten tragedies. With a deep breath, Jerome pushed it open, revealing a narrow back alley washed in the cold light of a distant street lamp. Outside, the storm had subsided into a strange, eerie quiet. The rain had left the air saturated with the metallic tang of blood and the lingering sorrow of those who had perished. The group gathered, trembling and disoriented, the horrors of the night clinging to them like a shroud. They looked back at the monolithic structure of the Walmart, its windows dark and unyielding. In its silent facade, they saw the echoes of 100 voices, each one a ghost story waiting to be remembered. For a long moment, they stood without speaking, each one lost in the ghastly realization that the past, with all its torment and tragedy, could never truly be exorcised. It was ingrained in the very foundation of the building, a grim monument to forgotten lives and unresolved grievances. Ethan's eyes were fixed on a small scratch on the door where a name had been etched into the wood, a name he recognized from a faded newspaper article about the old warehouse fire. "They never got justice," he murmured, voice barely audible. "They were forgotten by history, and now history is coming back to claim us." A sudden rustling in the alley made them all jump. In the dim light, they saw what appeared to be a small child standing at the edge of the group. The child's eyes were large and sorrowful, and when it spoke, its voice was soft and mournful. "Please remember me," it pleaded. "I was lost. I was never found." The apparition of the child dissolved almost immediately after the words were uttered, leaving behind a silence heavier than before, and a lingering question of what justice meant in a world that had forsaken its innocence. As the group tried to regain their composure, a chilling realization crept over them. The nightmares of Walmart were not a singular event confined to the one night. This was a recurring horror, a macabre cycle that played out as long as the building stood on the cursed land. The store, with all its bright promises of consumerism and convenience, was an accidental mausoleum for the tormented souls of the past, a place where echoes of lost lives would forever murmur their unrest. Before they could decide on what to do next, a low, guttural roar emanated from inside the building. It was as if the very structure was summoning retribution upon those who dared disturb its slumber. Marcus, shaking but resolute, turned back to the store. "There's something inside," he said, his voice steady despite the terror. "Something that doesn't want to be forgotten and is determined to remind the world." Jerome nodded, swallowing hard. "We have to document this. We have to let people know, even if it scares them." Each of them knew that what had happened could either be dismissed as an overactive imagination or, more likely, a glimpse into a painful part of history that the modern world had chosen to ignore. They collected what little evidence they could, snippets of their radio communications, hastily scribbled notes, and even a grainy video recording that captured moments of inexplicable horror on a malfunctioning phone camera. In the days that followed, the survivors struggled with nightmares and flashbacks that horrifying night. The evidence they had gathered created a dilemma: expose the dark legacy hidden beneath the gleaming exterior of a modern retail giant, or bury it to preserve the semblance of normalcy in everyday life. But as the recordings played out in quiet midnight meetings and the scribbled notes were passed from one trembling hand to another, it became clear that the truth was too damning to ignore. The local newspapers began to receive anonymous tips. Journalists, with a mix of skepticism and morbid curiosity, ventured into the building for interviews and further investigation. Rumors swirled across social media, turning Walmart's legacy into urban legend. Some said that the whispers could be heard in the hum of the air conditioning and the scent of burnt wood lingering in closed-off corners. Others claimed they had seen spectral figures roaming the aisles after hours, their eyes filled with sorrow and unfulfilled yearning. The impact was seismic, shaking the confidence of a society that prided itself on progress and consumer culture. Yet for those who had experienced that night firsthand, the reality was much more harrowing than urban legend. They knew that somewhere within the sprawling labyrinth of aisles and behind every polished display, the agony of decades past was alive and seeking acknowledgement. And as Walmart continued to operate under the veneer of normalcy during the day, the silent specters lingered, waiting for the cover of darkness to reclaim their lost voices. In time, the story of that night became a cautionary tale, a dire reminder that even in the most familiar places, the echoes of an unrighted past can lead to unimaginable horrors. And if one listened closely enough, amidst the routine of daily life, one might still hear the faint plea of, "Remember me, remember us," carried on the wind through the aisles of the colossal store. The experience left an indelible mark on each of those who survived that night. Their lives, once ordinary and predictable, were now interwoven with a truth that was too grotesque to unsee. They went on with their days, forever haunted by fleeting glimpses of that spectral world, a constant reminder that beneath the polished veneer of modern commerce lies a shadow of history, fueled by pain, guilt, and the undying need for remembrance. And every night, as the sun sank and Walmart's neon lights flickered to life in the darkness, a part of that lost history stirred anew, ready to reclaim its place in the living world, with a whisper, a scream, or a fleeting glimpse in the periphery of one's vision. The ghosts of Walmart were not content to be locked away in forgotten history. They demand to be seen, to be heard, and above all, to be remembered.
Story number 2.
The salt air clung to every surface as the research vessel Aurora cut through the midnight waves. Under an ink-black sky, punctured only by the scattered gleam of distant stars, the ocean revealed more than its usual restless temperament that fateful autumn night. Dr. Evelyn Harker, a marine biologist whose brilliant mind was only surpassed by her unyielding curiosity, stood at the bow. In the chill of the sea breeze, her eyes, wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension, scanned the horizon as if expecting the water itself to confess its secrets. Beside her, Captain Roland Pierce adjusted his cap, his gnarled hands steady on the railing. He was a man in his 60s, with decades of experience battling both nature's fury and its many riddles. His weathered face, carved by time and tempered by loss, spoke of mysteries that the vast and unforgiving ocean had whispered to him in sleepless nights. "There's something out there tonight," he murmured in a low tone, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice resonated with an intensity that hinted at memories he'd rather forget. Below deck, the rest of the crew huddled in the cramped navigation room. Jonah Rise, a skeptical journalist whose pen had chronicled disasters and triumphs alike, leaned over a spread of weathered maps and sonar images. "Captain, you really believe in ghost stories?" he questioned, a wry smile playing on his lips even as unease gnawed at his insides. His tone was laced with irony, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. The ocean had stories that defied reason, and tonight, those stories were beginning to take shape in ways none of them could have predicted. The vessel's engine hummed steadily as if in protest against the eerie silence that had fallen over the deck. At the center of this silence was Marisol Vega, the ship's communications expert. With a furrowed brow, she listened to a series of inexplicable radio transmissions that crackled with fragmented voices. "Captain, we're picking up something on frequency 13.7, she called out softly. "It sounds like distress calls, but the language isn't one I recognize." Her words sent a ripple of tension through the room, each crew member acutely aware that the night was rapidly spiraling into territory uncharted by science or reason. Captain Pierce slowly moved toward the console, his eyes narrowing as he examined the cryptic sounds. "Patch it through to the main speaker," he ordered in a voice that brooked no argument. The room filled with disjointed words and unearthly tones that swam like phantoms in the dark ether. Dr. Harker exchanged a worried glance with Jonah, and even Captain Pierce's hardened demeanor wavered for a moment. "It's a warning," the captain said quietly, almost reverentially. "A warning from the depths." As the clock ticked toward midnight, the wind picked up, whipping the sea into frothy chaos. Waves slammed against the hull, their force echoing in the minds of those aboard. Marisol's hands trembled as she adjusted the dials, trying to isolate the source of the mysterious transmission. "I can't get a stable signal," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the clamor of the storm. "It's as if whoever is out there doesn't want to be found." Outside, the cold spray of the ocean mingled with the swirling mist that began to obscure the stars. The horizon darkened to a bruise-like purple, and the waters churned with a malevolent intensity. Then, as if emerging from the very heart of the storm, a shape took form. At first, it was nothing more than a distortion in the wave, a phantom outline just beyond the reach of the ship's beams. But with every passing second, the form grew more defined and its contours unmistakably human. Or so it seemed. "Do you see that?" Jonah whispered, his voice a mix of excitement and dread. He squinted into the darkness, watching as the figure drifted closer with a deliberate, almost hypnotic gait. "It's coming right for us." Dr. Harker, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes perceived, replied, "It can't be. The ocean doesn't harbor living beings like that." But the shape persisted, its movements too measured to be the erratic play of a creature driven solely by instinct. Captain Pierce's voice cut through the mounting tension. "All hands, prepare for unexpected contact. Secure all stations and remain calm." His orders were direct, though they belied a deep-seated uncertainty that even he could not mask. The crew responded with practiced precision, their motions robotic, despite the terror that clutched their hearts. The mysterious figure drew nearer, its form becoming more distinct against the phosphorescent glow of bioluminescent plankton swirling in the wake of the ship. As it came within a few dozen feet, the shape resolved into that of a person, but not one that any of them could identify as human. It wore tattered clothes that fluttered like seaweed in the watery current, and its face was shrouded in shadows, save for eyes that burned with an unworldly light. The apparition's lips moved, forming silent words that reverberated in the minds of those who listened. "Return what was taken. Return what was stolen." The voices seemed to chant in unison, echoing across the roaring sea. Jonah, compelled by a mixture of journalistic instinct and dread, gripped his recorder tightly. "Captain, we need to document this," he said, his voice quavering. "This is history in the making." But Captain Pierce's stern expression told him otherwise. "Some histories are best left undisturbed," the captain replied gravely. "There are legends of sunken treasures, cursed relics, and vengeful spirits that haunt these depths for a reason we must tread lightly." Dr. Harker's scientific curiosity battled with her innate caution. "But what if this is an opportunity to understand a phenomenon that defies our current knowledge?" she argued softly, her eyes never leaving the spectral figure as it hovered near the vessel's edge. "We have a responsibility to learn, to record these events accurately." Her words were met with uncertain murmurs from several crew members, as if the very air aboard the Aurora vibrated with the weight of unfathomable secrets. The storm grew fiercer, and lightning fractured the sky in jagged bolts that illuminated the ghastly figure in sporadic flashes. Each burst of light revealed more of its eerie form, a face gaunt and sorrowful, marked with the deep scars of anguish, and hands outstretched as if pleading for salvation or retribution. With the roaring wind as its herald, the figure's voice resonated louder, now distinctly audible over the crashing waves. "Return what was taken, return what was stolen, or suffer our fate." Captain Pierce's eyes hardened with resolve. "I've heard the tales of the ship Lady Morwenna," he said, his voice low and measured. "A century ago, a merchant vessel carrying a priceless artifact sank in these waters. The legend says that the stolen relic cursed the souls of those it wronged, condemning them to wander these depths in search of restitution." His gaze drifted to the figure, and it seemed to pause, as if recognizing the invocation of its tragic past. Marisol's fingers danced over the console, desperately trying to stabilize the tumultuous communications. "There's more. I'm picking up additional signals, like whispering calls from beneath the hull," she reported, her voice trembling. "It's as if the ocean floor itself is crying out." Her words sent shivers down the spines of everyone present, intensifying the surreal atmosphere that already smothered the deck. In that moment, a deafening crash reverberated from below decks. The ship shuddered violently, and a chorus of panicked shouts erupted from the crew as water began to leak through the compromised bulkheads. "Man overboard," someone yelled, and Captain Pierce instinctively ducked as an unseen force seemed to pull at the very foundations of the vessel. The spectral figure at the rail moved as if drawn by a magnetic pull, its eyes locked onto a narrow hatch leading into the ship's lower compartments. Jonah, ever the chronicler of events, mustered the courage to speak. "Captain, we need to know what it wants. This isn't random. This is something deliberate." His words were swallowed by the cacophony of creaking metal and lashing waves, yet they resonated with urgency. If history is repeating itself, then this relic, whatever it is, must be returned to its rightful place. His voice was resolute, though fear danced beneath his determined tone. Captain Pierce, his features etched with grim determination, responded, "We may not have a choice. If the curse is real, it will continue to torment the living until the debt is repaid." His eyes scanned the faces of his crew, searching for courage among the sea of uncertainty. "We must lower a line to that hatch, secure a team, and investigate below. Dr. Harker, you're coming with me. Marisol, I need you to maintain communication. Jonah, document everything you can. We leave in 5 minutes." With hearts pounding like the relentless surf against the hull, a small group hurried to prepare for the descent. The air was thick with apprehension, and even the storm seemed to whisper words of warning. As the team gathered near the hatch, the spectral figure's haunting chant rose once more, its voice now a sorrowful dirge that sent icy tendrils down their spines. "Return what was taken, or suffer our fate." In the claustrophobic corridors beneath the deck, the darkness was absolute, save for the thin beam of a waterproof flashlight. Captain Pierce led the descent, each step measured and deliberate, as if the very act of moving forward was a defiance against fate. Dr. Harker clutched her notepad tightly, ready to record any detail that might explain the inexplicable. Their footsteps echoed in a rhythm that seemed to summon lost voices from the deep, a reminder of the countless souls claimed by the merciless sea. The passage led them to an old cargo hold, where remnants of a bygone era lay strewn about like relics of another world. Rusted chains, broken crates, and the faded insignia of the Lady Morwenna whispered of tragedies long buried. Captain Pierce paused before a large, barnacle-encrusted chest that sat in the center of the room. His hand hovered over its surface as he muttered, "This must be it, the artifact that unleashed the curse." His voice was a mixture of resolve and sorrow, for he knew that some truths were forever entwined with loss. As he slowly opened the chest, a chilling gust of air swept through the hold, snuffing out their flashlight beams momentarily. In the fleeting seconds of darkness, Dr. Harker heard a whisper, a soft, mournful plea that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Forgive us," it breathed, the sound fragile and desperate. When the light flickered back on, inside the chest lay a small, intricately carved box adorned with symbols that evoked ancient, forgotten rituals. The artifact pulsed with a faint luminescence, and its eerie energy filled the room with an unsettling warmth. Before anyone could react, the low, mournful chanting resumed from above, louder now, more insistent. A voice called out from the darkness beyond the cargo hold, "Return it to the deep, or bear witness to our eternal torment." The words were not a threat, but a heart-wrenching lament that stirred memories of lives lost to greed and betrayal. Captain Pierce stepped back, his eyes fixed on the box as though trying to decipher its silent message. Dr. Harker's hand shook as she reached for the box. "We cannot keep this," she said, her voice quivering with both fear and understanding. "It belongs to the sea. It must be returned to where it was taken from." Her words resonated like a long-forgotten incantation that awakened something in the depths. For a moment, the room grew colder, and the sound of distant weeping echoed as if the ocean itself mourned the sins of the past. Jonah's voice, recorded faintly on his device, broke through the eerie silence. "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if the ocean is alive, and it holds grudges that span centuries." His statement, filled with a raw intensity, underscored the gravity of the moment. The crew felt the weight of history pressing upon them, a history that demanded reparation for deeds long concealed beneath the shifting sands of time. Captain Pierce made a decision in that heavy moment. "We have to return it," he declared firmly, though uncertainty lingered behind his steely gaze. but we must do so with reverence and haste. The curse will not rest until balance is restored. With practiced precision, he and Dr. Harker carefully secured the artifact in a waterproof container as if to honor its sacred duty and protect themselves from its malignant influence. As they ascended back to the main deck, the storm outside had abated into a restless drizzle that belied the turbulence of what they had just encountered. The spectral figure had vanished, leaving behind only the echo of its mournful chant and the lingering sense that the ocean was watching. On deck, Marisol's anxious face lit up as she confirmed through the radio that strange signals had ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the vessel's hull. Jonah, still clutching his recorder, approached Captain Pierce with measured steps. "Do you believe we've seen the truth tonight?" he asked, his voice soft with the weight of what they had experienced. The captain looked out over the vast expanse of dark water, contemplating the fragility of human existence against the relentless tide of fate. "I believe that the ocean keeps its own ledger," he replied solemnly. "For every wrong committed against it, it demands restitution. Tonight, we were mere messengers of that ancient debt." Dr. Harker, her eyes reflecting both newfound knowledge and lingering dread, added quietly, "There are forces here that we cannot understand, not fully. But we owe it to those lost souls to do what is right, even if it means confronting our own fears." Her words seemed to unite the crew in a common purpose, a silent vow to mend the imbalance that had wreaked havoc on their lives. In the early light before dawn, the Aurora changed course toward a secluded cove known for its treacherous underwater terrain. The plan was simple, yet imbued with ritualistic gravity: to return the stolen relic to the abyss from which it had been taken. As the vessel came to a slow halt off a rocky outcrop, Captain Pierce, Dr. Harker, and a small team donned diving gear. The restless ocean, now calm on the surface, belied the ancient fury that lay hidden beneath. Marisol's voice crackled over the radio one last time. "All frequencies are clear. May the sea forgive what has been done." The words, though technical in nature, carried a weight that transcended mere communication. They were an invocation, a plea for redemption. With a deep breath, Captain Pierce led the team over the side of the vessel into the cold embrace of the Atlantic. Beneath the surface, the world transformed into an alien realm of muted blues and shifting shadows. The divers moved slowly, their flashlights cutting through the murky depths as they navigated ancient rock formations and tangled kelp forests. Every inch they advanced seemed to awaken the lingering spirits of sunken ships and lost dreams. The relic, now enclosed in its protective case, pulsed with a quiet, hypnotic rhythm that resonated with the heartbeat of the ocean floor. At a depth where light scarcely penetrated, the divers reached a cavernous opening in the bedrock. It was here, in the silent sanctum of the deep, that the relic was to be returned. With deliberate care, Captain Pierce lowered the container into a narrow crevice among the coral and stone, as if placing a fragment of human greed back into the rightful home of nature. In that solemn act, time seemed to pause. The ocean itself held its breath, waiting to see if balance would be restored. A sudden surge of water rippled through the cavern, dislodging sand and scattering tiny bioluminescent creatures that flickered like stars in the underwater gloom. The team watched in muted awe as the current enveloped the relic, drawing it deeper into the darkness. The pulse of the artifact faded gradually until it was swallowed entirely by the silent void. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing and the low murmur of the sea. Above, on the deck of the Aurora, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, a pale promise of a new day tempered by the scars of the night before. The crew gathered on deck, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief, mingled with a somber understanding of the forces they had encountered. Captain Pierce stood at the railing, his gaze lingering over the vast expanse of water, as if ensuring that the debt had truly been repaid. Jonah broke the reflective silence, speaking in a tone that carried both wonder and melancholy. "I'll write every detail, every whispered word of tonight. This isn't just a story about a haunted relic. It's about the ocean's memory and the lives we share with it." His words, measured and deliberate, captured the essence of what they had all experienced, a profound lesson in humility before the forces of nature. Dr. Harker added softly, "We have seen what lies beyond our understanding, a glimpse of an ancient grief that refuses to be forgotten." The sea is a witness to all our sins, our triumphs, and our secrets. It remembers, even when we try to forget. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a mixture of sorrow for the lives lost and respect for the enduring power of the ocean. Captain Pierce turned slowly to his gathered crew, his voice resolute and calm, despite the tumult of emotions swirling within him. We set out tonight to unravel a mystery, to confront a curse born of human avarice. And while we may never fully comprehend the depths of the ocean's soul, I know one thing. Its secrets are not meant for us alone. They are the burdens and blessings of every life that has touched its shores. His words lingered like a benediction, a silent reminder that the legacy of the night would forever alter them all. As the sun rose higher, casting shimmering trails on the gentle swells, the Aurora resumed its course, leaving behind the darkened cove and the cavern that had borne witness to reparation. The crew dispersed into the warm light of morning, each carrying with them a fragment of that otherworldly night, a memory that would haunt their dreams and inspire their stories for years to come. In the days that followed, whispers of the events aboard the Aurora began to circulate among the coastal towns. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the night the ocean demanded restitution, and those who had not been there found themselves wondering if the sea could, in truth, reclaim what was rightfully hers. Jonah's recordings and notes became the subject of fervent discussion among skeptics and believers alike, each retelling layered with the magic and melancholy of a truth too immense for simple explanation. For Captain Pierce and his crew, the memory of that night was both a curse and a comfort, a reminder that the ocean, in all its vast mystery, was a living archive of human folly and redemption. And whenever they sailed near that haunted stretch of water, they would occasionally catch a glimpse of something moving in the deep, hear a faint echo of a plea carried on the tide, a timeless murmur that said simply, "Return what was taken, return what was stolen." Even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy on land, and scientific journals debated the nature of the phenomenon, the stories of that stormy night became a part of the lore of the real ocean, a chilling reminder that some legends are as deep and enduring as the waters themselves.
Story number 3.
The endless highway stretched before them under a bruised twilight sky, its asphalt ribbon disappearing into the horizon like a promise of both freedom and dread. Jackson Jack Marlowe gripped the steering wheel of the battered old station wagon as he navigated the winding roads of rural America. Beside him, his lifelong friend, Elena Reyes, kept a nervous eye on the rearview mirror while an uneasy silence had settled into the cramped interior of the car. What began as a simple road trip to clear their minds from recent heartbreak and shattered dreams was rapidly morphing into an odyssey threaded with inexplicable happenings and shadows of a past best left unspoken. They had set off at dusk, fueled by impulsive wanderlust and the vague notion that the open road might offer them an escape from the burdens of their everyday lives. Elena's eyes had sparkled with excitement as she mapped out the quirky roadside attractions and mysterious landmarks they planned to visit. But as the miles accumulated, the cheerful banter gave way to a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. The radio emitted only static and low, haunting tunes that seemed to mimic the relentless hum of the engine. Every flicker of neon from isolated gas stations and motels felt less like a beacon of hope and more like a warning, resonating with the unspoken terror gnawing at their hearts. At around midnight, with the moon a ghostly sliver in the sky, Jack pulled off at a forgotten rest area that should have been deserted. The rest area was a relic from a bygone era: cracked concrete benches, rusted light poles, and an overgrown landscape that resembled a cemetery more than a roadside refuge. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Elena shivered despite the mild temperature. "I swear it feels like we're being watched," she murmured, drawing her jacket tighter around her slender frame. Jack chuckled uneasily, though even his voice betrayed uncertainty. "It's just the wind, Lena. Old places like this always give off a weird vibe." They decided to take a brief pause before continuing their journey. Their only company was the faint call of a distant coyote and the unsettling creaks of the old wooden sign at the entrance of the rest area that read, "Welcome travelers. Beware the past." Jack's stomach churned as he studied the inscription, wondering who in their right mind would add such a cryptic message. Elena, however, felt a chill crawling along her spine, as though the words were a deliberate omen. After a few minutes of uneasy silence, they returned to the car and resumed their journey along a lonely stretch of highway bordered by twisted, barren trees. The deeper they ventured into the isolation of the countryside, the more apparent it became that this journey was no longer a simple road trip. It was a plunge into a living nightmare. Around 2 a.m., as Jack's eyes began to droop from the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the headlights ahead revealed what appeared to be a figure standing by the roadside. Jack slowed the car, squinting into the darkness. "Hey, Elena, do you see that?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Elena leaned forward, her eyes wide as she tried to make sense of the vague outline. In the fleeting beam of the headlights, a lone figure clad in tattered clothing seemed to be flagging them down. Against his better judgment, Jack pulled over. "Hello? You need a ride?" Jack called out through the window as he rolled it down slightly. The figure didn't speak immediately, merely raised a hand as if to beckon them closer. As the strangers stepped into the dim light, the features became clearer. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man whose sunken cheeks and tattered garments gave him the look of someone long forgotten. His voice, when it came, was raspy and laced with desolation. "Take me with you," he pleaded, his words barely audible above the sound of the wind. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, and Jack hesitated. "Where do you need to go, friend?" he asked cautiously. The man's eyes darted around the dark highway before settling on Elena. "I'm trying to get home," he said in a whisper that seemed to echo from a realm beyond. Something about his plea tugged at Jack's conscience, and, despite the foreboding chill in his gut, he unlocked the passenger door. "Climb in," he said softly. As the mysterious hitchhiker settled into the back seat, a tense silence enveloped the car. Elena felt an overwhelming urge to speak, to ask who he was and where he was headed, but the words died in her throat. Instead, the stranger's presence cast a pall over their journey, transforming the familiar interior of their car into a confessional chamber for unspeakable secrets. Minutes later, as they merged back onto the highway, the stranger spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You must understand, some roads are cursed. Once you journey on them, you can never escape what lies in between." Jack's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his tone firm yet laced with fear. The stranger only stared out the window as if peering deep into the twisting road ahead, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. As the miles rolled by, a series of inexplicable events escalated their terror. In the distance, roadside billboards flickered erratically, displaying cryptic messages and blurred images of eyes that seemed to follow the car's every move. At one point, the radio abruptly cut to a low, hissing static interlude, punctuated by the sound of distant sobbing. Elena reached for the dial, trying vainly to find a clear station, but every frequency burst with disjointed voices whispering, "Turn back, turn back." The words repeated over and over, echoing in the confined space until Jack slammed the radio off. "What the hell is going on?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. The hitchhiker remained silent, fries back, his expression unreadable, as he simply stared out into the darkness. Suddenly, a low, guttural laugh erupted from somewhere inside the car, a sound that made both Jack and Elena jump. They exchanged a glance that said everything. They were no longer in control. The road took a sharp turn through a dense grove of gnarled trees. The foliage pressed close to the car, and shadows danced on the dashboard like phantoms in a macabre ballet. It was then that Jack saw it. A figure mirrored perfectly in the rearview mirror, sitting on the back seat, yet no additional person was there. Heart-pounding, he glanced back, only to find the seat empty, save for the solitary figure of their mysterious passenger. Elena's eyes met his in shared horror. "Did you see that too?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack nodded mutely, swallowing hard, as the car seemed to gain weight with every heartbeat. They pressed on until the road led them to an abandoned roadside diner, its neon sign flickering and barely legible. With an unspoken agreement that they needed answers, Jack pulled into the cracked parking lot. The diner's windows were clouded and dusty, and the door creaked open with a ghostly moan as they stepped into its stale, heavy air. Inside, the place was frozen in time, a relic of better days now overtaken by decay and despair. At a corner booth, an elderly waitress with milky eyes and a gaunt smile greeted them, even though it was well past midnight. "Welcome to Mel's," she intoned, her voice void of warmth. "What'll you have?" Jack hesitated, then explained in halting words that they were just passing through, searching for a warm meal and maybe a bed for the night. The waitress's smile flickered for an instant before settling into an eerie, fixed grimace. "Sometimes," she whispered, leaning forward so that the dim light etched deep shadows into her face, "the road gives back what you've lost, and sometimes it takes a piece of you." Her words hung in the air like a prophecy. Over stale coffee and cold fries, the trio of travelers, Jack, Elena, and their enigmatic hitchhiker, listened as the old waitress recounted the local legend. "They say that long ago, a family vanished near these parts," she began, her eyes not leaving the steam rising from her cup. "Some believe that cursed souls wander these highways, forever trapped between worlds. Every so often they appear to remind the living that some debts can never be repaid." Her voice trembled on the edge of a sob, and an oppressive silence fell over the booth. Jack's skin crawled with each word, and Elena felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she couldn't tell if it was from fear or sorrow. Before they could ask more, the diner's lights flickered violently and went out, plunging them into darkness, as if the building itself were trying to hide its secrets. When the lights sputtered back to life moments later, the old waitress had vanished, leaving nothing but an empty chair at their table. The hitchhiker muttered under his breath, "It's time to go." His words were laced with an inevitability that made the hairs on the back of Elena's neck stand on end. Returning to the car in a daze, they found that the atmosphere had changed even further. The midnight sky now shimmered with a strange, spectral light, and the road seemed to twist unnaturally beneath the weight of an unseen force. With no other choice but to continue their journey, Jack restarted the engine. "We need to get out of here," he said, voice resolute despite his inner terror. Elena nodded, clutching the door handle as if it were a lifeline. The hitchhiker's eyes, reflecting the otherworldly glow of the sky, remained fixed on the road ahead. As they drove deeper into the rural backroads, the landscape morphed into a surreal montage of abandoned farms, decrepit barns, and fields bathed in an eerie luminescence. Every mile delivered new signs, faded graffiti on crumbling walls, road markings that disappeared inexplicably, and distant figures that darted in and out of peripheral vision. Elena began to record the strange phenomena on her phone, capturing odd flashes and whispered words that seemed to ride the wind. "Jack, do you see that?" she asked, her voice quavering with mounting dread as a message appeared on her screen. "You can't run from what the road remembers." Jack slammed his hand on the dashboard in frustration. "This isn't possible," he muttered, forcing himself to concentrate on the road ahead, though he could feel the weight of unseen eyes following their every move. "Somehow, it feels like we're trapped in a loop. Every mile is leading us deeper into something far darker than we could ever imagine." His words were swallowed by the low rumble of the engine, and in the distance, the wail of an approaching storm rolled over the landscape, mingling with an almost imperceptible chorus of voices. Their journey took a disturbing turn when the car's headlights illuminated what appeared to be an impossibly long stretch of road lined with antique automobiles, all rusted and abandoned. The vehicles were arranged as if by an unseen hand, their windows shattered, their bodies corroded by time and neglect. In the center of this macabre display, a lone car still glowed under the spectral light. It was as if this decaying procession was a memorial, a monument to lost souls and forgotten tragedies. Elena's heart raced as she whispered, "Jack, what is this place?" But Jack could only shake his head, his eyes fixed on the lone car that seemed to pulse with a faint, foreboding light. Just then, the mysterious hitchhiker leaned forward, his voice a strained murmur that resonated with deep sadness. "They say this road, it takes the memories of the dead and traps them here, reliving their final moments over and over. We're not just passengers, we're witnesses to their despair." Elena's hands trembled as she recorded his words, her mind reeling from the possibility that their journey was intertwined with forces far beyond human comprehension. Suddenly, the radio crackled back to life with a burst of static and a voice that was unmistakably familiar, a voice that sounded like Jack's late father. "Jack, come home," it pleaded, a sorrowful command reverberating through the car's cabin. Jack's eyes widened, and he slammed on the brakes. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice breaking, remembering how his father had died years ago. Elena reached out, trying to steady him, but the ghostly message continued, distorted and desperate. "You left me. You must come back before it's too late. The collision of memory, grief, and supernatural dread made the air feel as if it were charged with electricity. Jack's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel tightly, every nerve on high alert. "We need to keep moving, Elena," he said shakily, his tone strained with both fear and determination. "This road, it wants something from us." The hitchhiker's eyes, dark and sorrowful, met Jack's in the rearview mirror. "Only when you confront the memories will you find the path forward," he intoned cryptically. The miles stretched onward like an interminable nightmare, and eventually they reached a decrepit rest stop at the edge of an abandoned ghost town. The quiet was oppressive, as if the silence itself were warning them away. Seeking refuge, they parked under a dilapidated overpass where graffiti, PD, peeling paint, and cryptic symbols covered every surface. Elena stepped out, the chill of the night biting through her jacket as she surveyed the area. In the distance, a faint glow emanated from a broken window of an old building. "Maybe there's someone there," she suggested, her voice a mere whisper lost in the wind. Jack hesitated but nodded, and together they approached the building cautiously. Their footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as they drew near the door. Before Jack could knock, a voice came from inside. A voice that was raspy, laden with sorrow. "Leave. This is not for you," it warned. The duo exchanged a tense glance, uncertainty etched on their faces. The hitchhiker, who had remained silently in the car, now stepped out, his eyes scanning the dilapidated structures with a resigned familiarity. "I know this place," he said softly, almost apologetically. "It's where many have come searching for lost answers and found only regret." Inside the building, amidst scattered relics of the past, they discovered old photographs and newspaper clippings recounting tragedies long buried. A particular article detailed the disappearance of a family who had vanished without a trace on a desolate stretch of highway decades ago. The headline read, "Family Lost to the Endless Road." Alina's hands trembled as she read it aloud. "They say the spirits of those who vanished here are cursed to wander, forever doomed to replay their final moments." A sudden, bone-chilling knock on the door startled them. Jack cautiously opened it, revealing no one on the other side, only the howling wind and the echo of his own racing heartbeat. The hitchhiker's face darkened as he muttered, "The road never forgets." In that instant, the building seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Shadows twisted into forms that mimicked the faces of the lost, and the air filled with a cacophony of whispered lamentations. "Come back! Come back!" With no time to waste, Jack ushered Alina and the hitchhiker back to the car. The road beckoned once again, as if demanding that they continue the journey to the heart of its dark mystery. The radio fell silent, and the only sound was the drumming of the tires on the cracked pavement. A heavy fog began to roll in, swallowing the landscape and muffling the world in a suffocating blanket. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, and the car's headlights cut through the mist like futile beacons in an endless void. In the oppressive darkness, every twist and turn of the road became a potential trap. Elena's eyes darted nervously from side to side. "Jack, I think we're being led somewhere," she said, her voice tremulous. "Every road seems to circle back to where we've already been." The hitchhiker nodded solemnly, his gaze distant. "This is the reckoning. The road is showing you your past, the part you hope to forget." Jack's jaw clenched as the memories of painful losses and regrets rushed back with a vengeance. In the midst of the swirling fog, he saw fleeting images in the corner of his eye. Visions of his father standing silently by the roadside, his eyes accusing and full of longing. The apparitions seemed to multiply until the car was filled with echoes of voices, the phantom murmurs of those who had once traveled these haunted highways. Desperate for answers, Jack accelerated, determined to outrun the ghosts of his past, even as the very pavement beneath him vibrated with the relentless pulse of fate. Elena gripped her seat, her knuckles white, as the world outside warped into a surreal montage of spectral imagery and distorted recollections. The hitchhiker's quiet voice penetrated the oppressive silence. "You cannot escape what is already inside you." In that moment, the car screeched to a halt as they encountered a fork in the road. One path bathed in a sickly yellow light from a lone, flickering street lamp, and the other swallowed by darkness. Jack's heart pounded as he pulled out the map, only to find that both routes were strangely marked with the same cryptic symbol. A circle intersected by a jagged line as if drawn by an unseen hand. "This is it." Jack murmured, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "We have to choose." As if answering his unspoken plea, the radio burst into static and then, clear as day, Jack's father's voice emerged one final time. "Remember, son, the road never lies. Face the truth or remain forever lost." With that, the voice faded into a haunting echo that urged them toward the illuminated path. Swallowing his fear, Jack slowly guided the car toward the yellow-tinged road. With every mile, the surreal manifestations grew stronger. Glowing silhouettes of past travelers appeared in the peripheral vision, their faces contorted in eternal anguish. Elena's breath caught as she saw a little girl in a faded dress clutching a ragged doll, her eyes hollow and unblinking, beckoning silently for salvation. The hitchhiker leaned forward, his tone mournful yet resolute. "It's time to confront what the road has kept hidden. Only by accepting our darkest memories can we break its hold." At a seemingly deserted clearing, the car came to a stop in front of an old derelict roadside chapel. Its once white paint was chipped and stained by time, and the wooden door creaked in the wind. The chapel's stained glass windows, though shattered, still cast eerie patterns on the ground, a tapestry of sorrow and regret. With the hood of the car open and the engine silent, the trio stepped out into the cold night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the distant sound of a mournful hymn drifted from within the chapel's darkened interior. Inside, the chapel's pews were covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, and a tattered altar stood as a testament to forgotten prayers. Carved into the altar was the same symbol they had seen on the fork in the road. Jack felt compelled to touch it, his fingers tracing the rough lines as if trying to grasp the key to his own salvation. "This is where everything comes together," he murmured, voice trembling with both terror and understanding. Elena and the hitchhiker circled him, eyes fixed on the symbol as it seemed to pulse under his touch. A sudden, unearthly whisper filled the chapel, surrounding them with the voices of those long dead. "Return, return." The whispers merged into an inaudible chant, each syllable a mixture of longing and despair. In that moment, images flashed before Jack's eyes, a montage of his life. Childhood memories of laughter and warmth, the crushing pain of loss, and the mistakes he'd buried deep within himself. Each memory was intertwined with the ghosts of the road, forming a tapestry of regret and redemption. Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes wet with compassion. "Understood. If you have any further requests or need clarification, feel free to ask." "Got it. Let me know if you need anything else."
Story number 4.
The old Crestfall Hotel loomed at the edge of town like a dark secret, a grand relic from another era with a facade of faded elegance and windows that seemed to watch every passerby. It was on a chilly October evening, when autumn's winds whispered of impending change, that Marissa Coleman first arrived with a mix of trepidation and determination. A seasoned journalist with an appetite for the unexplained, she had heard rumors of bizarre happenings within Crestfall's ancient walls and resolved to uncover its truth. Armed only with a notepad, a tape recorder, and her own guarded skepticism, she stepped through the heavy, creaking entrance and into a lobby filled with memories and unspoken warnings. The reception desk, carved from dark mahogany and chipped by years of neglect, was manned by an elderly clerk named Harold, whose watery eyes betrayed both sorrow and resignation. "Welcome to Crestfall," he said in a husky voice, the words lingering like a curse in the dusty air. "We hope your stay is unforgettable." His smile was thin and uneasy, and Marissa couldn't help but wonder if the man was speaking of a charm or a threat. Marissa nodded politely as she registered, noting the flickering lights overhead and the chill that seemed to seep from the ancient stone walls. She was assigned a room on the 3rd floor, and Harold handed her a heavy brass key with a number etched in faded gold. "Room 317, he murmured, as if the number itself was laden with meaning. "And please, do be mindful of the hallways. They have a way of rearranging themselves at night." With a polite but puzzled thanks, Marissa made her way to the narrow staircase, her footsteps echoing on the worn carpet. The corridors were dimly lit by weak incandescent bulbs, and the silence was punctured only by the creak of floorboards and the distant hum of an old clock. Her heart fluttered as she recalled the many haunted hotels she'd researched over the years. But Crestfall's oppressive aura was unlike any ghost story she'd ever encountered in print. Once inside room 317, Marissa surveyed the space, a room frozen in time, furnished in an antiquated style with heavy drapes, a musty bedspread, and a small writing desk illuminated by a single lamp. She set her recorder on the bedside table and began to jot down her first impressions. As midnight approached, the hotel's true nature began to reveal itself. The wind outside howled, rattling the window panes, and the sound of distant voices seemed to seep through the walls. Around 12:15 a.m., as Marisa sat cross-legged on the bed reviewing her notes, a soft knock echoed at the door. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. There was no immediate reply, only the sound of shuffling footsteps. Finally, the door creaked open a crack, revealing a slender figure clad in a tattered nightgown. Her skin was pallid, and her eyes, dull and unfocused, stared vacantly at Marisa. "Please, forgive me," the figure whispered in a voice that trembled with despair. "I don't mean to intrude." Marisa's skepticism wavered in the face of raw sorrow. "I'm sorry," she replied gently, "but you shouldn't be here." The spectral visitor's eyes pleaded with a wordless urgency as she reached out a trembling hand, stopping just short of the doorframe. "They took my name and my life," she murmured, before she faded into the darkness, leaving behind only a lingering trace of cold despair. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Marisa decided to explore the hotel the next day. Morning light struggled to penetrate the heavy drapes, and the once illustrious lobby now seemed cloaked in a perpetual gloom. She found Harold behind the desk once again, and his eyes widened slightly when she mentioned the encounter. "There are things in Crestfall that should remain in the past," he cautioned, lowering his voice. "Some souls once lost never truly leave. They wander these halls in search of something they can no longer remember." Unsure if he was defending the hotel or warning her off, Marisa pressed on. "What happened here, Harold? Who are they?" she asked softly. His gaze drifted downward, and he exhaled a heavy sigh. "Decades ago," he began, "a terrible fire broke out in room 317. A young bride, Eleanor Blackwell, was to be married that very night. Rumor has it she was set to inherit a great fortune, a truth that many coveted. But on the eve of her wedding, someone, or something, sabotaged the venue. The fire spread quickly, and by morning, Eleanor was trapped, screaming for help that never came. Ever since, her spirit, and those of others lost in that inferno, have roamed Crestfall, forever bound by tragedy." Marisa listened, her heart pounding as she recorded every word. "And tonight I experienced something, someone, suffering, trying to tell me a part of that story." Harold's eyes filled with a resigned sadness. "Many have tried to uncover the truth of that night," he said, "but the hotel guards it fiercely. Once you disturb its secrets, it doesn't let go easily." That afternoon, Marisa began her investigation in earnest. She combed through old archives in the dusty hotel library, where volumes of yellowed newspapers and forgotten diaries told fragmented tales of heartbreak and corruption. One particularly tattered journal belonged to a maid named Lillian, who had worked at Crestfall during the fateful night. In halting script, she recounted how she witnessed a shadowy figure lingering near Eleanor's room, as if orchestrating the chaos. Lillian wrote of a secret rendezvous, a plan hatched in greed, and a terrible betrayal. The fire was no accident, the diary concluded ominously, but a curse cast upon those who craved fortune over love. As dusk fell again, Marisa felt both dread and resolve. That night, she intended to spend several hours in the corridor outside her room, hoping to document any paranormal activity firsthand. Armed with her recorder, a digital camera, and a notebook, she ventured into the labyrinth of corridors. The halls were still, seemingly dormant, yet the silence felt pregnant with anticipation. It was then that she encountered a man in a threadbare suit leaning against a peeling wall. His eyes met hers with an intensity that chilled her to the bone. "Looking for answers, Miss Coleman?" he asked softly, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. Startled, Marisa took a cautious step back. "Who are you?" she demanded, heart racing. "I was once like you," he replied cryptically, eager to uncover the truth behind these walls. "But some truths are better left unspoken. I am Jonathan, the caretaker of Crestfall. I've been here longer than most care to imagine." Jonathan's presence was disarming in its calm, yet his expression carried a weight of sorrow and regret. "I've seen restless souls, seen secrets turn into curses," he said, glancing down the hall. "If you proceed, be warned. The hotel doesn't suffer fools lightly. It demands acknowledgement and respect. It has, do you truly wish to stir what has been left to rest? His eyes searched hers, as if daring her to question his words. Marisa took a steadying breath. I have to know what happened, Jonathan. I need to tell their stories. For a moment, he appeared to consider her plea before nodding slowly. Very well, he said quietly. Follow me. Jonathan led her through a maze of corridors to a locked door at the end of a hallway, behind which lay the remnants of room 317. The door itself was scarred by smoke and time, its surface inscribed with soot and cryptic symbols. This is where Eleanor Blackwell spent her last moments, Jonathan murmured as he produced an old key and unlocked the door. Inside, the room was a charred capsule of tragedy. The walls bore dark stains, and the furnishings were charred silhouettes of their former selves. Amidst the wreckage lay a solitary, blackened wedding dress draped over a chair, a haunting relic that seemed to pulsate with an otherworldly sorrow. Marisa's hand trembled as she stepped inside, camera in hand. Eleanor, she whispered, as if calling out to the ghost of the woman trapped in time. A faint sob echoed around her, and she almost spun around to see a figure in the dim light. A pale woman in the ruined dress, her eyes filled with a profound sadness and longing. You must remember? The apparition whispered, voice fragile yet insistent. The truth must not be forgotten. Marisa's heart hammered as she steadied herself. I will remember, she vowed, and I will tell your story. The figure began to fade slowly, the sorrow in her eyes deepening before she vanished entirely, leaving Marisa alone in the oppressive darkness of the ruined room. Shaken but determined, Marisa documented every detail, the burn marks on the wall, the delicate lace of the ruined dress, and the ethereal hint of a melody carried on the breeze that seemed to rise from the very depths of despair. Jonathan watched silently from the doorway as she worked, his expression unreadable. There is a curse on this hotel, he finally said, his voice low and grave. Not just the curse of an untimely death, but the bitterness of betrayal. Eleanor was meant to be cherished, and yet she was cast aside for greed and envy. The fire did not only claim her life, it claimed the souls of those who conspired against her. Over the following days, Marisa interviewed several longtime staff and locals who bore their own memories of Crestfall. A maid recalled strange occurrences, doors opening on their own, disembodied cries in the dead of night, and a groundskeeper told tales of eyes watching from the shadows of the surrounding woods. Every account added layers to the legend of the hotel, painting a picture of deep-seated pain and unresolved vendettas. One local, an ex-guest named Robert, recounted a harrowing experience. I heard voices in the hallway, whispering names I'd never heard before. I saw footsteps when no one was there. I left Crestfall as fast as I could. Something in that place didn't want to let me go. The nights that followed grew progressively more unsettling. Marisa found her room invaded by inexplicable sounds. A persistent tapping at the window at 3 a.m., muffled weeping echoing in the corridors, and, most disturbing of all, the recurring whisper of, "Remember me," drifting through the silence. At times, she caught fleeting shadows at the edge of her vision, and once she distinctly heard the soft rustle of a dress brushing against the carpet as if someone glided by. In one particularly harrowing moment, she awoke to find the recorder on her bedside table playing a looped message in a voice that seemed eerily familiar. The truth lies within the flame. Return our voices. Determined to break the cycle of fear, Marisa confronted Jonathan one evening in the nearly empty lobby. Why won't these spirits let you leave this place? She asked, frustration and pity mingling in her tone. Jonathan's eyes glistened with memories of pain. Because Crestfall is more than just a building, he replied. It is a sanctuary of broken promises, a monument to lives that were snuffed out abruptly. In their final moments, those souls were denied closure, and now they linger, unable to rest until justice is served. I, too, am bound by these walls. I have watched over Crestfall for decades, trying to ease their torment, but I cannot change the past. Marisa's heart clenched at his words, and in that moment she realized that her investigation was about more than a story. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced. I promise you, Jonathan, she said softly, I will tell this story with the truth it deserves. Every sorrow, every injustice, they will not be forgotten. Jonathan's expression softened, and for the first time she saw in him not a mere caretaker, but a guardian whose own fate was entwined with the ghosts of Crestfall. As her final report began to take shape, Marisa arranged one last nighttime session in the dilapidated room 317. Alone now, with only the sound of her own breathing and the persistent tapping at the window to keep her company, she set up her camera and recorder to capture what might be the hotel's final secret. The air grew unnervingly cold, and the shadows in the corners deepened, as though anticipating the culmination of decades of grief. She sat before the ruined wedding dress, scribbling her final notes, when a sudden gust of wind burst through the broken window. The pages of her notebook fluttered wildly, and the temperature plummeted. In that moment, the spectral figure of Eleanor Blackwell materialized before her, more vivid than ever. "Thank you." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, laced with resignation and bittersweet hope. "Thank you for remembering us." Maurice's tears welled as she reached out, her hand trembling in the darkness. "I will," she vowed. "I will remember every name, every moment, until the truth is finally known." The apparition's eyes shimmered with gratitude and a deep sorrow that spoke of centuries of neglect. Then, as swiftly as she had appeared, Eleanor dissolved into motes of light that drifted up and vanished into the murky ceiling. In that unforgettable instant, Marisa understood that Crestfall was not merely a haunted hotel. It was a living chronicle of love, betrayal, and the relentless quest for redemption. The spirits that had once wandered its halls with anguish now found solace in being remembered. With a newfound resolve, she compiled all her interviews, photographs, and personal accounts into a comprehensive expose that chronicled the dark legacy of the Crestfall Hotel. Her story resonated deeply with readers far and wide, awakening a collective memory of forgotten tragedies and urging an unspoken reconciliation between the living and those trapped by untimely death. Months later, as the hotel continued to stand in quiet decay at the edge of town, whispers of its legacy became folklore. Some said that if you stood in the lobby at midnight, you could hear joyful laughter mingled with sorrow, a sign that the spirits, having finally been acknowledged, were finding some measure of peace. Harold still manned the reception desk with a knowing look, and Jonathan remained vigilant, ever the silent guardian of Crestfall's secrets. And though the ghostly apparitions continued to wander in fleeting moments of melancholy, there was now a gentle assurance in the air, a promise that every soul would be remembered, and every story, however tragic, would find its end in the light of truth. In the lingering twilight of one autumn evening, as the wind whispered through the empty corridors, Marisa revisited Crestfall one last time. Standing in the lobby, she pressed her hand against the cool marble wall and closed her eyes, feeling the presence of 1,000 forgotten voices rising in gentle unison. "I remember you," she murmured softly to the silent room. And in that eternal moment, Crestfall, the home of restless spirits and tragic histories, embraced her with the quiet warmth of a long-awaited absolution.
Story number 5.
Under a sky smeared with bruised twilight and distant, flickering stars, the neon sign of the Route 67 gas and stop shuddered to life in the vast loneliness of rural America. The small station, with its peeling paint and rusted pump handles, looked like an afterthought on a forgotten highway, a lonely sentinel watching over miles of desolation. It was the kind of place that held secrets beneath its cracked pavement and within the static hum of its outdated radios. For decades, this gas station had been a crossroads where fate, desperation, and something darker than mere loneliness converged. Caleb Jensen pulled his old sedan to a hesitant stop in the gravel lot, exhausted from long hours behind the wheel. It was nearing midnight, and the open road had become a labyrinth of endless black, punctuated only by the occasional halo of distant headlights. The journey was meant to be a quick fuel stop, a momentary pause before he resumed his drive to a town where he hoped to escape the ghosts of his recent past. But as he stepped out into the chill night air, a prickle of unease rustled through him. There was something off about the way the gas station's lights flickered, a stuttering pulse that mimicked the beat of a troubled heart. Inside the station's cramped convenience store, the air was thick with the stale odor of tobacco and machine-made coffee. Shelves bowed under the weight of dusty snack packets and expired energy drinks. Behind the counter stood Marla, a gaunt woman whose eyes were tired and distant, as if she had witnessed far too many lonely nights pass in silence. She offered a thin, almost haunted smile when Caleb entered. "Evening," she murmured, her voice low enough that it barely disturbed the oppressive stillness. Caleb returned a polite nod as he made his way to the counter, his eyes scanning the room and lingering on a faded poster on the wall, a warning about night watchers and the price of roads untaken. He couldn't shake the feeling that the words were meant for someone else, or perhaps for him. "Just a fill-up, thanks," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. Marla's fingers, bony and trembling slightly, punched in the price on an old register that groaned in protest with every keystroke. "You look like you've had a rough drive," she remarked after a pause, her eyes locking with his in a gaze that seemed to pierce into his very soul. "Yeah, something like that?" Caleb replied warily. "Long nights on empty roads, you know how it is." She hesitated, then leaned in, lowering her voice as if sharing a whispered secret meant only for the brave. "These parts, they hold memories. Not all of them pleasant. Folks say that sometimes when the night grows too quiet and the wind carries voices, you hear the echoes of mistakes made here long ago." Her words trailed off as she glanced toward the dusty window bay where the neon sign buzzed in erratic pulses. Caleb managed a half smile. "Stories get around out here, don't they?" Marla's smile faltered. "Some stories, son, aren't just stories." Overhead, the buzzing of fluorescent lights mingled with the low hum of a vintage radio broadcasting an eerie, distorted country tune. Caleb couldn't help but notice how the radio kept skipping, as if something was interrupting the transmission. It wasn't long before an unmistakable sound emerged, a faint, static-laden voice that seemed to speak through the hiss. "I'm still here, remember me?" Caleb froze, heart pounding faster than he had expected. The voice was unmistakable in its sorrow, and for a long moment, he struggled to process that a ghost might be speaking through an old radio in a rundown gas station. Before he could ask any questions, the store's door banged open behind him, sending a rush of cold air through the room. Marla's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously toward the door. In walked a man dressed in a threadbare trench coat and a battered fedora, his face obscured by shadows cast from his hat. His presence seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. "Evening," the stranger said in a voice that was both courteous and unnervingly detached. His eyes darted around the room as if surveying hidden dangers. "Strange night, isn't it?" Caleb's instincts, sharpened by hours of lonely driving on endless highways, made him cautious. "Yeah," he replied cautiously. "Strange enough to have ghosts on the radio." The stranger's lips twitched in a wry smile. "Old places like these are known to hold on to memories," he said. "Some say the station itself remembers the lost souls of travelers who never made it home." He stepped closer, his gaze now fixed on Marla, who looked as if she might collapse under the weight of her own secrets. "You, dear lady, why do you stay here? Haven't you felt the pull to leave that place behind?" Marla's voice was nearly a whisper. "This station, it's more than a job. It's my anchor. The memories, the losses, they're part of who I am." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for an instant the atmosphere in the small store felt heavy with sorrow and regret. Caleb felt a shiver traverse his spine. "I'm just passing through," he offered, trying to divert the conversation, though his own curiosity had been piqued. "But I've always wondered about the stories here. Something about this place seems like it's been here far longer than any of us." The stranger moved to the counter and folded his hands as if bracing himself to share a tale that had been whispered on these winds for decades. "Listen carefully," he said, his tone cold and confident. "Many years ago, on a night much like tonight, a truck laden with desperate souls careened off these very roads. The driver, a man burdened with his own demons, lost control. They say he didn't survive the impact, and his spirit, tormented and remorseful, remained bound to this stretch of highway. On nights when the world is cloaked in darkness, you can still hear him raging against fate, swearing that he'd come back to collect his due." Caleb's pulse quickened. "You really believe that?" he asked, though he couldn't decide whether to challenge the words or to believe them. The stranger's eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to consider his question before he spoke again. "That's not all," the stranger said softly. "There was a girl, no older than 14, who stopped by for gas one stormy night. She was frightened, and the attendant tried to help her, but she left in a hurry and vanished into the night. They later found her diary under the hood of a car, pages burnt and scattered, detailing her desperate attempts to outrun a nightmare that would never let her go. People in these parts talk about her, calling her the runaway angel, for her spirit is said to haunt back roads, pleading for salvation that never comes." Marla, now visibly trembling, whispered, I've seen her reflection in the window." Every time the clock strikes 3, her face appears, sorrow etched on every line, as though she's begging to be remembered. Her eyes searched the stranger's face as if looking for confirmation, and in that unguarded moment, the terror of the station felt almost palpable. Caleb, caught between skepticism and an unsettling sense of truth, cleared his throat. So what do we do about it? What keeps these ghosts here? His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and a desperate need to understand. The stranger leaned in closer, about his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. The past is never dead here. It clings to every rusted pump, every cracked tile. When the road mourns, these spirits are drawn to places like this, where their fate was sealed. Sometimes they beg for someone to help them move on, to find closure for the wrongs done to them. His eyes flicked to the radio, which was still emitting that mournful message, "I'm still here. Remember me." Outside, a deep rumble of thunder announced the approach of a storm. The neon sign flickered erratically as dark clouds swallowed the moon, and rain began to pelt the roof with a staccato rhythm. In the sudden cold, Marla shivered, and Caleb's heart felt as if it might burst. The stranger straightened up and walked to the door, pausing to look back at them. If you ever find yourself alone on that lonely stretch of road after dark, listen carefully. The truth is not in the roar of the engine, but in the silent voices that whisper in the night. They are the lost, the broken, the souls who never got to say goodbye. As quickly as he had appeared, the stranger exited the store, leaving behind an oppressive silence that settled like a thick fog. Caleb, his mind racing with questions and half-formed images of ghostly apparitions on the highway, went outside to inspect the pumps. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the world outside had transformed into a silvered nightmare. Each puddle on the asphalt seemed to ripple with reflections of faces that were not his own, and the neon sign's glow danced on the wet ground like erratic fireflies. While checking the pump's gauge, his hand brushed against something cold and clammy, an old, faded photograph wedged in the control panel. He retrieved it gingerly, and his breath caught in his throat. The black and white image depicted a smiling family of 3 parked beside the very same pump decades ago. The father's arm around his young daughter, the mother's face beaming with quiet pride. Yet something in the eyes of the little girl seemed off, a mix of terror and sadness that defied the scene's otherwise ordinary suburban charm. On the back of the photograph, in shaky handwriting, was written, "I remember you." Caleb's pulse hammered in his ears as he slowly returned inside. The sense of foreboding had deepened, wrapping around him like the wet tendrils of the storm. He rejoined Marla, who was now silently staring at the radio with tears glistening in her eyes. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked softly, voice trembling. "I did," Caleb replied, holding out the photograph. It's all real, isn't it? The voices, the apparitions." Marla nodded, her gaze heavy with grief. "They never left," she whispered. "This place is a vessel of their memories. Every night, when the road is empty and the storm rages, they come back to remind us of what we have lost." The radio crackled one more time, and the static gave way to a final, sorrowful plea. "I'm still here. Remember me." The voice reverberated through the store, mingling with the sound of the pounding rain and the distant roll of thunder. In that moment, Caleb felt an overwhelming kinship with the voices, a shared loneliness, a palpable grief that transcended time and space. Determined to put his restless thoughts into order, Caleb decided to wait out the storm on the premises. He settled into a creaking chair by the window, the photograph clutched in his hand as if it were a talisman. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, someone was reaching out, a hand extended from the void of memory, seeking acknowledgement. As the hours dragged on, the storm's fury lulled into a tired drizzle, and the radio's insistent whispers dwindled to a soft murmur. In the dead hours of the early morning, as the first hints of dawn bled pale light into the sky, Caleb heard footsteps echoing outside on the rain-soaked ground. They were soft and deliberate, a measured cadence that hinted at both urgency and sorrow. He rose cautiously, the worn soles of his boots slapping against the wet concrete as he made his way to the door. Outside, in the faint glow of a failing street lamp, he saw a figure huddled beneath the awning. A young man, drenched and trembling, his eyes wild with unspoken anguish. "Need help?" Caleb called out in a gentle tone, though the words felt strange in the fragile light of morning. The young man looked up, his eyes filled with a haunted desperation. They won't let me leave," he stuttered, voice quivering. Every time I try, I see them. Faces, voices. I can't escape the memories of that terrible night. The chill in his voice was not merely from the cold rain. It carried the weight of a soul tethered to the past. Caleb, moved by both pity and his own lingering terror, beckoned him inside. Over a steaming cup of coffee, the young man, whose name was revealed as Dominic, began to recount his story in trembling detail. It was about 5 years ago, Dominic began, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in his cup. I was driving down this very road when my car broke down. I stopped at a gas station, much like this one. The attendant, an old woman much like Marla, warned me about ghosts of the road, about the tragic accident that had occurred here. I laughed it off then, thinking it was just superstition. But that night, after I left, I started seeing things. Faces in mirrors, figures in the dark. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl, her eyes pleading for help, and the driver with fire in his eyes, cursing his fate. I've tried to move on, but their voices follow me. I can't shake the feeling that if I ever try to leave this area, they'll catch up to me and drag me back into the past. Caleb's heart ached as he listened, the pain in Dominic's voice resonating with the sorrow of the station itself. It's like the station is cursed to hold all these broken memories, he said quietly. And maybe we're the ones paying the price. Dominic nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. I don't know how to escape, he whispered. Every time I think of leaving, I see that photograph, the family, the little girl. They're all stuck here, and somehow I'm a part of that cycle. The soft murmur of the radio in the background seemed to echo Dominic's despair, and in that moment, Caleb made a quiet vow. I'm going to document all of this, the voices, the stories, everything, so that maybe one day we can help them find the peace they deserve. As the morning slowly transformed into a gray, overcast day, Caleb busied himself with scribbling notes in a battered notebook, recording every detail of Dominic's account and the eerie messages from the radio. Marla, who had returned to her quiet vigil behind the counter, offered solemn nods as if in silent support. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving behind a cleansed yet somber landscape, and the neon sign of the gas station burned with a muted glow against the awakening sky. In the days that followed, Caleb found himself drawn back to that desolate gas station, as though some unseen force compelled him. Each visit deepened his understanding of the place and its tragic legacy. With every passing hour, he pieced together snippets of conversations from passersby. A trucker who claimed to have seen a spectral figure by the pumps, a traveler who swore he heard a child crying under the asphalt, an old-timer who recalled the accident that shook the town decades ago. The fragments were chillingly real, and as Caleb compiled his notes into a coherent narrative, he realized that the station was the nexus of countless broken lives, each one tethered by the shared pain of unresolved loss. One night, determined to experience the haunting firsthand, Caleb returned alone. The station was darker than before, the neon sign flickering erratically as though struggling to stay alive. Inside, the silence was almost tangible, broken only by the soft murmur of the radio and the echoes of his own footsteps on the sticky floor. Standing near one of the pumps, Caleb opened his notebook and began to read aloud some of the entries he had recorded. "I'm still here. Remember me." The words, spoken into the emptiness, seemed to reverberate beyond the confines of the room. As if in response, the old register behind the counter burst into static, and for a brief moment, Caleb swore he saw the outline of a face in the display. A face that wore the anguish of decades, eyes pleading for redemption. The air grew impossibly cold, and a faint whisper, almost lost in the hiss of the static, murmured once more, "I'm still here. Remember me." Caleb's heart pounded furiously as he glanced around, half expecting to see Marla or Dominic appear from the shadows. Instead, he was met with nothing but the oppressive solitude of the abandoned station. The feeling of being watched, of being enveloped by countless sorrowful gazes, was overwhelming. Slowly, as if drawn by an irresistible force, he approached the counter. There, etched into the wood, was a word, scratched crudely but unmistakably. Forgive. The meaning of that single word hit him like a tidal wave. It was a plea, a desperate longing for absolution. All the lost souls that haunted this place had been trapped by their own regrets. The tragedy of the long-ago accident, the driver's furious grief, the little girl's unhealed terror, the silent hopes of the family in the photograph, had fused into a curse that doomed the station and everyone who passed through it. In that moment of raw revelation, Caleb felt a deep kinship with the place. He understood that the spirits were not malevolent, but rather lost, desperate, and crying out for someone to acknowledge their pain, to offer them a path to forgiveness. With trembling hands, he whispered into the stillness, "I remember. I remember everything. Please find your peace." The radio's static softened into what sounded like a sigh, a long, burdened exhalation that seemed to carry away years of pain. Outside, the first rays of dawn filtered through the dark clouds, casting the gas station in a pale, uncertain light. Caleb knew that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a convergence of the living and the dead, a moment when the past reached out to heal itself through the acknowledgement of its wrongs. In the following weeks, Caleb worked tirelessly on his account of the station. He interviewed locals, gathered fragments of memories, and even uncovered hidden records of the tragic accident that had occurred so long ago. His story, raw and unflinching, told of a place where the dead and the living existed side by side, both bound by the unyielding ties of unresolved sorrow. It was a narrative of heartbreak and haunting beauty, a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are not those wrought by wicked intent, but those born from the pain of loss and the desperate need for closure. Word of Caleb's work spread slowly through the county. Others began to visit the station not only for fuel, but also in the hope of bearing witness to its spectral inhabitants. Each visitor left with a lingering sense of melancholy and a newfound reverence for the memories hidden in the heart of the night. Marla, whose own life had been irrevocably entwined with the station's fate, took solace in Caleb's words, believing that perhaps the restless spirits had finally found a voice. Late one autumn evening, a group of new visitors, a couple intrigued by local legends, stopped by the station. As they filled their tank, the man, half-jokingly, asked, "You ever wonder what kind of stories these old pumps have seen?" The attendant behind the counter, now older yet carrying the same haunted expression, simply replied, "Oh, plenty. And sometimes, if you listen close, they'll tell you a story of regret, of redemption, and of the chance for forgiveness." The couple exchanged a nervous laugh, but as they drove away, the soft echo of a voice on the radio seemed to whisper on the wind, "I'm still here. Remember me." In that timeless cycle of sorrow and remembrance, the gas station continued to endure, a monument to the forgotten souls who roamed the highways in search of absolution. And for Caleb, now a quiet guardian of its secrets, every visit became a reminder that sometimes the greatest horror lies not in malice or violence, but in the unbearable weight of lost memories and the desperate yearning for someone, anyone, to say, "I remember." Over time, as seasons changed and years slipped by, the station's eerie ambiance softened into something akin to a bittersweet lullaby. The neon signs still buzzed in the midnight gloom. The radio continued to murmur its sorrowful refrain. Yet there was now an undercurrent of hope, a belief that by bearing witness to the past, the condemned might finally find the grace to be forgiven. Caleb's account of the gas station became a testament not just to supernatural occurrences, but to the universal need to remember, to acknowledge, and ultimately to forgive. On one crisp winter's night, as snow began to fall quietly over the barren landscape, Caleb stood by the station once again, the cold air crisp against his face. In his hand, he clutched the old photograph, the one of the smiling family with the haunted little girl. And in his heart, he carried all the whispered confessions of those long past. "I remember," he repeated softly, and in that gentle promise, the echoes of the dead seemed to whisper back with acceptance. In the end, the story of the gas station was not merely one of horror, but of healing, a reminder that even the most tragic memories can be redeemed by the light of remembrance. And as Caleb drove away that night, the headlights cutting through the fresh snow, he felt a profound peace settle over him, a sense that perhaps he had done his part in unburdening the road of its sorrowful cargo.
Story number 6.
Dr. Evelyn Mercer had seen her share of heartbreak and tragedy within the sterile corridors of St. Aidan's Hospital, but nothing in her 17 years as an emergency physician had prepared her for the night that would shake her to her core. The sprawling hospital, a towering relic of mid-century modern design on the outskirts of an old industrial town, was notorious for its rigorous schedule and limited resources. Yet even amid the ceaseless beeping of monitors and frantic footsteps, rumors of unexplained occurrences had never entirely faded from the whispered lore of its night staff. It was a particularly bitter winter night when the temperature plunged far below freezing. The corridors were long and quiet, and the usual hustle of daytime activity had given way to an eerie stillness. Dr. Mercer, exhausted from an endless stream of trauma cases, was closing in on the end of her shift when she received an urgent call. Room 317, code blue, the intercom crackled. By then, the hospital's ancient ventilation system groaned as it struggled against the bitter winds outside. With little time to collect her thoughts, Evelyn raced down the hallway toward the intensive care unit. Upon arriving at room 317, she found a scene that defied explanation. The patient, a middle-aged man who had been admitted with a severe heart condition, had inexplicably flatlined. The monitors displayed an ominous stillness, their red lines frozen in a final, morbid stutter. A chill crept over Evelyn's skin as she knelt beside the bed. Something about the silence was almost palpable. No alarms echoed, no voices of distressed family members could be heard. Only the low murmur of an unseen wind seemed to pass through the window, despite the room being sealed against the frigid cold. "Dr. Mercer?" a voice whispered softly in the dim light. Evelyn stiffened, glancing around to see a shadow move at the periphery of her vision. Who's there?" she asked, though her tone conveyed both caution and an unspoken urgency to dismiss the disturbance as mere exhaustion. In response, the whisper came again, clearer this time, drifting from the corner near a cabinet long disused. "Help? Please. Remember me." The words were so laden with despair that Evelyn's heart pounded. Advancing cautiously, she pressed herself against the wall as a figure slowly materialized. A gaunt, pale woman in a tattered gown, her eyes wide with melancholy, seemingly suspended in a moment of agony. The apparition's voice was a brittle echo of sorrow. "They left me, alone, forgotten." And then, as if the hospital's very lights could not contain such anguish, she faded away. Evelyn's rational mind raced. Her training had instilled in her a hard boundary between the empirical and the supernatural, yet something in that spectral plea, the raw, guttural need for remembrance, gnawed at her. She steadied herself, forcing clinical detachment back into her thoughts. The patient in room 317 needed her attention, and though the death was evident, it was as if the room itself bore an unspeakable secret. Later that night, as the clock in the corridor struck 2:13 a.m. in an incessant hollow chime, Evelyn was making her rounds when she encountered a nurse named Marcus. A man with kind eyes and a weathered face that reflected decades of wariness. "Dr. Mercer," he said in a hushed tone, almost conspiratorial. "Have you noticed anything off in room 317? His hand trembled slightly as he clutched a clipboard scrawled with notes and sketches. Evelyn frowned. "Off how?" Marcus's gaze darted nervously toward the closed door of the room. "I've seen that woman. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks during a long shift. But her eyes, they're full of sadness and regret. And last night, I heard her whispering. It's as if she's crying for someone to remember her story." Evelyn's pulse quickened as she tried to recall the ethereal encounter from earlier. "Her name? Did you hear it?" she inquired softly, mindful of the fragility of Marcus's composure. He shook his head, the question hanging in the stale corridor air. "She didn't say her name, just 'remember me' over and over. It's like a prayer or a curse." His eyes brimmed with a mixture of fear and curiosity that reminded Evelyn of her own unacknowledged grief. Something told her that this was no random hallucination conjured by a fatigued mind. There was history here, a dark chapter hidden in the sterile margins of patient files and fading family pictures. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself drawn back to room 317 during quiet moments between emergencies. While the hospital buzzed with the routine of life and death, she began to piece together the fragments of a mystery that resonated with a strange intimacy. In the hospital's archives, a dusty storeroom in the basement lined with filing cabinets that crunched under the weight of forgotten records, she discovered a faded photograph of a young woman in a hospital gown, her face frozen in an expression of sorrow. Next to the photo was a clippings of a local newspaper reporting a tragic accident at the hospital decades ago. The headline read, "Nurse Abigail Hargrove dies in mysterious collapse." The article detailed that Nurse Hargrove was well-liked, known for her compassion, and had died under unexplained circumstances in room 317. There was no further explanation, only a note that some believed her spirit still lingered in the corridors of St. Aidan's. That night, with the hospital corridors empty and dim under the watchful eye of the security cameras, Evelyn decided to confront the source of her unsettling visions. She returned to room 317 armed with nothing but a handheld recorder and a resolve that bordered on desperation. As she sat in the near-empty room, staring at the silent monitors and the ghostly imprint of faded medical equipment, she whispered, "Abigail, if that's you, I'm here. I remember you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop perceptibly. The fluorescent lights flickered as if burdened with their own fatigue, and a chill swept across Evelyn's skin. For a long, heart-stopping moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, softly, almost imperceptibly, the air trembled with the sound of a soft sob. "Help me." The voice was raw, laden with years of regret and abandoned hope. It was undeniably human and undeniably desperate. Evelyn's hands shook as she recorded the voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the silence. "I'm here. I remember you." The reply came in the form of a fleeting shimmer, a pale vision of Nurse Hargrove, her eyes sorrowful and yet piercingly familiar. They never cared," the spirit murmured, her voice breaking. "I gave everything, and in the end I was cast aside." The apparition advanced toward the wall as if drawn by the echoes of old conversations, and then faded, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of sorrow and unanswered questions. The following morning, as the hospital stirred to life with rushed footsteps and the low hum of intercom announcements, Evelyn recounted the night's events to Marcus during a brief coffee break in the staff lounge. "It felt as if Nurse Hargrove was trapped in a loop of anguish," she said quietly, eyes distant. "She wasn't angry so much as broken." Marcus nodded, though the lines of worry on his face deepened. "I saw her too, in the reflection of that window by the supply closet. It was like she was pleading for justice." His voice faltered, and for a moment, the weight of the hospital's past seemed to settle upon them both. Determined to set things right, Evelyn began to investigate the circumstances surrounding Nurse Hargrove's untimely death. She pored over old records and interviewed retired staff who remembered the tragedy. One elderly nurse, her hands trembling as she recounted the night of the incident, revealed that Nurse Hargrove had been involved in a bitter dispute with a hospital administrator known for cutting corners and making decisions that compromised patient care. "Abigail always put her patients first," the nurse recalled, voice thick with regret. But that night, when things went wrong, her pleas for help fell on deaf ears. There were rumors that it wasn't an accident at all. The notion that greed and neglect had played a part in Hargrove's demise sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. Could the ghost be reaching out not just for remembrance, but for retribution? At the same time, strange occurrences continued throughout St. Aidan's. Late one night, while making her rounds, Evelyn encountered a janitor named Louis, who had been quietly mopping in the deserted corridor. Louis's eyes were wide and his tone trembled as he said, "Doctor, sometimes when I'm cleaning near the old surgical wing, I hear footsteps, like someone's pacing back and forth in the dark. And then the sound of crying follows. So soft, yet so desperate." His confession added another layer to the mystery, suggesting that Nurse Hargrove's sorrow was not confined to room 317, but permeated the hospital as a whole. Haunted by these revelations, Evelyn realized that to free the lingering spirit of Nurse Hargrove, the truth behind her death needed to be exposed. She arranged to meet with an investigative reporter named Simon Rourke, a man known for his tenacity and his unfaltering commitment to uncovering hidden scandals. In the dim back office of a local newspaper, amidst stacks of old papers and half-burned coffee cups, Evelyn laid out the pieces of the puzzle she had gathered. Simon's eyes narrowed as he listened, his tone tinged with both empathy and determination. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, "then exposing this cover-up could bring justice to Abigail and perhaps put her soul to rest." Their conversation was punctuated by moments of silence as the gravity of the revelation sank in. "But be careful, Evelyn," Simon cautioned, his voice low. "There are powerful people who have thrived on the silence of this institution. You're not just dealing with ghosts, you're dealing with a legacy of corruption." Evelyn nodded, resolved. Then it's time to give her the voice she never had. Over the next few weeks, as the hospital's hectic schedule belied the underlying turmoil of its haunted corridors, Evelyn and Simon worked together. Every piece of evidence uncovered, a memo implicating the administrator, eyewitness accounts from those who had worked there years ago, and bank records showing suspicious financial transactions wove a tapestry of negligence and deliberate malice. Yet with every revelation, the spectral manifestations grew more intense. Late at night, on the empty hospital floors, disembodied footsteps echoed through the corridors. Doors would slam shut on their own accord, and Evelyn began to hear a persistent, mournful whisper repeating, "Remember me, remember me." One fateful evening, as a harsh winter storm battered the hospital and plunged its corridors into intermittent darkness, Evelyn found herself alone in room 317 once more. The atmosphere was charged with a desperate energy that felt almost tangible. With trembling fingers, she set up her recorder, determined to capture one final conversation with the spirit. "Abigail," she called softly, "I'm here to listen. I want to understand your pain." The temperature in the room plummeted, as if the air itself mourned. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the spectral figure emerged from the shadows. This time, the apparition's face was clear enough to reveal the tender beauty and deep sorrow of a young nurse whose life had been cut tragically short. "They denied me justice," Abigail whispered, her voice quavering with perpetual grief. "They let greed shatter everything I held dear." Evelyn's eyes moistened with empathy, and she responded gently, "I promise I will make them pay for what they did. Your memory will not be forgotten. Your truth will come to light." In that intimate moment, as the ghost's expression softened into one of fragile hope, the recorder captured every spectral word, a desperate testament to a life lost too soon and a cry for retribution that transcended death. The aftermath of that night was a turning point for St. Aidan's Hospital. With the damning evidence gathered by Evelyn and Simon, an investigation was launched. The corrupt administrator was forced to resign, and those who had enabled the cover-up faced public scrutiny. Slowly, change began to seep into the sterile halls of the hospital. New leadership, determined to honor the legacy of those who had suffered, vowed to reform protocols and to listen to the voices of the past. It wasn't long before Evelyn noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of room 317. The oppressive chill that had once accompanied every night's vigil began to recede, and the monitors that had once flickered with eerie stillness now displayed life with a steady, reassuring rhythm. One last time, as she prepared to leave the hospital after a grueling shift, Evelyn paused in the corridor outside room 317. The light overhead was soft and unthreatening, and for a moment she thought she heard a gentle whisper along the wall. "Thank you," it said, barely audible, yet filled with profound relief. Evelyn smiled through tears. In that whisper was the final benediction of a spirit finally at peace, a soul released from the bonds of past injustice. In the years that followed, Dr. Evelyn Mercer continued to work at St. Aidan's Hospital, her compassion deepened by the lessons of that fateful winter night. Although the ghostly echoes of Nurse Abigail Hargrove became stories recounted in hushed tones among the night staff, her presence was felt no longer as a harbinger of sorrow, but as a bittersweet reminder of the need for truth and accountability. And whenever the corridors grew silent and the darkness seemed dense, someone, often in a quiet, desperate voice, could be heard saying, "Remember me," a testament to the enduring power of remembrance and the healing that comes when long-forgotten truths are finally given a voice.
Story number 7.
Rex Big Rig Malone had spent most of his adult life on the open road. The endless highways, the endless nights, the hum of his 18-wheeler as it slogged through rain and dust, it was a life that suited him, a way to escape from the regrets of his past. But nothing had prepared him for that one fateful route deep in the heart of the Midwest, where the dark seemed to swallow more than just the dying light of day. It was a bitter November evening when Rex set off on a long-haul run from Kansas City to a remote distribution hub near the outskirts of a ghost town he once heard about on a CB channel. The highway stretched out before him like an empty artery, winding through farmland and forests, the occasional trailer of another truck a fleeting shape in the distance. Rex liked to keep his rig immaculate, his dashboard gleaming under the glow of numerous instruments, and his mind focused on the road. Yet tonight, a heavy mist was rolling in, swallowing up the lane ahead as if the world itself had decided to conspire with the darkness. As Rex merged onto the highway, the only sounds were the steady droning of his engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on asphalt. The radio, usually his companion on these lonely journeys, was tuned to static, Even his favorite country stations were off the air, replaced by a low, eerie hum that rattled against his ribcage. He shook his head and muttered, "Must be a dead channel," though a subtle chill settled along his spine nonetheless. Hours passed. The road narrowed as the surrounding landscape grew desolate. Farms were replaced by abandoned fields and broken fences. The CB radio flickered sporadically, occasionally catching snippets of voices. At first, they were just fragments, half-heard complaints about being stranded or warnings about the midnight drifter. Rex kept his ear to the channel, a habit born out of years from fellow truckers. They'd speak in hushed tones about strange happenings on these stretches of road, disembodied voices, shadows darting across the headlights, and a particularly uncanny story about a phantom rig that would appear on the highway in the dead of night. Drawing a deep breath, Rex adjusted the rearview mirror and continued on, determined not to be spooked by idle chatter. He had his work to do, and he knew that fear was a luxury for people who didn't spend enough time with it already. But as the hour hand crept past midnight, the atmosphere inside his cab began to feel oppressive. The temperature, controlled meticulously by his rig's heater, seemed to drop suddenly without warning. The dashboard lights dimmed, and the radio's low hum grew louder. Rex frowned and reached to adjust the climate controls, but the buttons were unresponsive, as though the machine had fallen under a spell. "Hello? Damn it, what's going on?" He called out more to himself than to anyone else. The cab felt charged, heavy with anticipation. And then it happened. A voice, barely audible above the hum of the engine, crackled over the radio. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered, drawing out each syllable as if weighed down by sorrow. Rex's hand froze on the steering wheel. He scanned the empty highway ahead. "What the hell?" he muttered. The voice repeated, "You shouldn't be here," and then faded, leaving him with nothing but his pounding heart and a creeping dread. He tried to retune the radio, but it only danced between channels of static and that inexplicable, haunting message. A sudden flash in the periphery of his vision jolted Rex, and his eyes flicked to the windshield. There, for a split second, he saw the outline of a truck, an old, rusted rig with broken taillights, stalled in the middle of the road. The truck's design was dated, a relic from decades past, and its presence was an anachronism on this modern highway. Rex felt an icy needle of fear prick his skin. He slowed down gradually, cautious not to swerve. "Hey, you there. Do you need a tow?" he called out in a gruff tone, trying to inject some rationality into the situation. There was no response, just the unyielding silence of the night. Rex pulled alongside the mysterious truck, his curiosity mingling with a growing sense of apprehension. When he rolled down his window, a chill wind swept in, carrying with it the scent of burnt rubber and something metallic, blood, perhaps, or rust. He peered into the dark cabin, but it was empty. No driver, no lights, only the ghostly silhouette of a truck that shouldn't be there. He sat back, his heart pounding, and resumed his drive. The phantom rig had vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the fog. Yet the radio continued its eerie refrain, "You shouldn't be here." The words gnawed at him, melding with his own doubts until they felt like part of his internal monologue. Rex switched the station off, trying to drown the message in silence, but it persisted in his mind. For the next few miles, he drove in an almost trance-like state, eyes fixed on the narrow beam of his headlights cutting through the mist. The landscape blurred into darkness, except for occasional glimpses of motion in the periphery. A fleeting figure on a barn door, a car disappearing into a puddle of reflective water. The highway's isolation had never felt so tangible, so suffocating. Then, as if the night itself had taken a malicious interest in his fate, he saw another anomaly. A truck stop sign at the edge of the road, its letters half-faded and barely legible, pointing toward Hawthorne's Rest. Rex didn't remember passing by that exit. The highway was supposed to be devoid of any civilization for miles. His instincts screamed that he should take the exit, but rational thought insisted that he ought to continue. The words of the spectral voice echoed in his mind once more, though he couldn't tell if they were warning him or simply a trick of his fatigued imagination. Before he could decide, the road ahead suddenly forked into a series of even narrower lanes. One path was well lit and clearly maintained, while the other was shrouded in darkness and lined with dilapidated buildings that looked like they had been abandoned for decades. The sign above the exit was split between Main Line and Hawthorne's Rest. Rex hesitated, scanning the horizon. The radio, left silent earlier, burst back to life with a frantic, overlapping chorus of voices. Hawthorne's Rest, don't go there. Turn back, turn back. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, and with a reluctant sigh, he flicked on his blinker toward the dark, unlit lane. He couldn't shake the feeling that this detour was inevitable, a convergence of fate and fear. The lane was narrow and unpaved, twisting through a forest of gnarled trees whose branches clawed at the night sky. The wind picked up, and leaves skittered across the asphalt like the frantic dance of unseen specters. Rex's rig shuddered as the rough terrain jolted his cab, and his anxiety ballooned with every mile. The radio, now just a low murmur of static punctuated by pleading voices, provided the only companion on this bleak journey. As Rex maneuvered through the winding road, he caught sight of a hitchhiker on the shoulder, a solitary figure clad in a weathered denim jacket and a faded cap. The man's thumb was extended, his face hidden in shadow. Rex frowned. Hitchhiking was as rare as rain in this part of the country, and he wasn't in the habit of picking up strangers on such desolate roads. Yet, something about the man's presence struck a chord in him, a shared sense of abandonment, perhaps, or the lure of a story waiting to be told. Against his better judgment, Rex pulled over onto a gravel shoulder. The engine's roar softened, and he lowered his window. "Where are you headed?" He called out in a voice that was equal parts curiosity and caution. The hitchhiker's voice was soft, almost fragile. "I'm headed to Hawthorne's Rest," he replied, his tone wavering slightly. "It's the only place left for souls like us." There was a pause, and then he added, "You shouldn't have come here, mister." His eyes, when they met Rex's, were a haunting mix of regret and desperation. Rex's mind raced. "What do you mean, shouldn't have come here?" he asked, his voice gruff yet laced with genuine concern. The hitchhiker stepped closer into the beam of the headlights, and for a moment the stark loneliness of the road was replaced by a suffocating intimacy. "Hawthorne's Rest," the man murmured. "It's where the dead are given no rest. It's a crossroads of pain and memory. Once you arrive, you never leave the same." There was a long silence as Rex considered the words. He wasn't one to be easily swayed by superstition, but the look in the man's eyes, the weight of his whispered warning, sent a shiver down his spine. "I'm already on that road," Rex replied, his tone low, as though he was whispering secrets to a dark confidant. "Maybe you can tell me what I need to know before I get too far." The hitchhiker gave a hollow laugh, and then motioned toward the darkness ahead. They say that long ago, Hawthorne's Rest was built on land soaked with tragedy, a collision of lives and lost dreams. When the accident came, many souls were trapped between worlds. They wander these roads, screaming silently for acknowledgement, for absolution, and sometimes they reach out through the static of radios, through flashing headlights, hoping someone will remember them. His voice cracked on the final word, and the sound of distant thunder rumbled as if in agreement. Rex shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure I believe all that ghost talk," he said, trying to sound dismissive, yet failing to hide the tremor in his words. "But I've seen things on the road, things I can't explain." The admission hung between them, as heavy as the gathering storm clouds overhead. The hitchhiker stepped back onto the shoulder, disappearing into the murk as silently as he had appeared. Rex stared after him for a moment, his mind racing with unanswered questions. The radio was now playing a low, mournful tune, a distorted version of an old country ballad that seemed to lament a life lost. Rex pulled back onto the road, his rig rumbling onward into the night. The further he went, the more the road seemed to warp around him. Every turn and dip of the gravel felt as if it were designed to trap him in a labyrinth of despair. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the tree's twisted limbs began to resemble skeletal arms reaching out to pull him into the darkness. His headlights illuminated vague shapes that moved with a deliberate slowness, like memories from a bygone era drifting in the fog. Hours later, Rex finally saw the flickering neon sign that marked the entrance to Hawthorne's Rest. Its letters were uneven, casting a lurid red glow onto the asphalt. The gas station that accompanied it was in disrepair, the windows dark and the door hanging loosely on its hinges. It was a relic, a forgotten pit stop for those who traveled on the edge of the world. Rex parked his rig in the station's lot, deciding to refuel both his truck and, perhaps, himself with a short break from the relentless drive. Inside the station, silence reigned. Dust motes swirled in the weak light of a single overhead lamp, and the scent of stale air mixed with an underlying tang of decay. An old clock ticked slowly on the wall, each sound echoing in the cavernous emptiness. Rex walked to the counter, where a tarnished radio hung from a hook. He tuned it, half expecting the ghostly refrain of "You shouldn't be here." But instead, the radio played a warped, almost indecipherable snippet of a voice, like a desperate plea lost in translation. It sent a shiver through him. A sudden slam of the door startled Rex, and he rushed to see who might have entered. Outside, in the bitter night, he noticed a figure standing by a rusted truck. It was the same hitchhiker he had encountered on the highway. The man was motionless, his gaze fixed on the station, his face gaunt and his eyes glistening with an otherworldly sorrow. Rex stepped outside, heart pounding. "Hey, you again," he called. "What's your story?" The hitchhiker regarded him silently for several long seconds. Then he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I warned you," he said. "This is no place for the living. The road here is soaked with regret, and Hawthorne's Rest is where you confront your deepest ghosts." His words, laden with despair, hung in the cold air like a bitter promise. Rex's hands clenched, but he found himself unable to walk away. Something about the man's forlorn eyes, that desperate need to be understood, compelled him to listen. "What are you trying to tell me?" he demanded, though his voice trembled. The hitchhiker's expression contorted with anguish. "I was one of them," he confessed, his gaze shifting downward. "I, too, have driven these cursed roads. I lost everything in that fatal accident, the love of my life, my chance at forgiveness. Ever since that night, I've been trying to warn others, to spare them the fate that awaits those who refuse to remember." His tone broke, and he added, "They're here, you know, all the souls who died too soon, who were left behind to wander. They whisper your name, and if you don't heed their call, they'll drag you down with them." A disquieting silence fell between them as the wind howled and the neon sign buzzed overhead. Rex's mind reeled with the enormity of the claim. He wasn't one to indulge in ghost stories. He was a man of the road, used to facing danger head-on, but the raw emotion in the hitchhiker's eyes was undeniable. "I've seen strange things too," Rex admitted slowly, "like that phantom rig on the highway or voices through the radio. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, until now." The hitchhiker nodded, his face etched with scars of loss. "We're all haunted, Rex," he said, the words falling like heavy rain. "Haunted by memories, by mistakes, and by the ghosts of what could have been. You must face them, or they'll keep haunting you forever." As the conversation dwindled, Rex realized that the call of the cursed road was impossible to ignore. He returned to his rig, his thoughts in turmoil and his heart heavy with unspoken dread. The neon sign of Hawthorne's Rest faded in the distance as he resumed his journey, leaving behind the decrepit station and the sorrowful specter of the hitchhiker. The rest of the drive was a blur. The mist thickened, and Rex's eyes darted constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting the phantom truck or a forlorn figure to appear. The radio, though silent now, seemed to pulse with an unutterable secret. Every so often, a gust of wind would carry a sound, an echo of a distant wail, a fragment of a desperate plea, and Rex would grip the steering wheel tighter, eyes straining against the oppressive darkness. When dawn finally broke, casting weak light on the interminable highway, Rex felt an exhausted relief as he pulled into a modern truck stop far removed from the cursed stretch of road. He parked his rig and sat for a long moment in silence, trying to shake off the memories of the endless night. But those memories clung to him stubbornly, as inescapable as the shadows that danced just beyond the reach of daylight. Later, as Rex sipped a strong cup of coffee in the bustle of the truck stop diner, he overheard a conversation between two fellow drivers. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones about Hawthorne's Rest, a place where many had claimed strange encounters, unexplained phenomena, and a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. One driver, his voice thick with apprehension, confided, "I once saw a rig on that road that shouldn't exist, and then the radio in my cab started playing a voice saying, 'You shouldn't be here.' I've never forgotten that night." The other driver nodded grimly. "We all have our ghosts. Some of us just drive a little longer, hoping the road will eventually forgive our sins." Rex leaned back, the weight of his experiences settling in his bones. He wasn't sure if what he had encountered was supernatural or merely the byproduct of isolation and exhaustion. But he knew one thing for certain: the road held secrets, and sometimes those secrets reached out with cold, unyielding fingers to remind you that some memories refuse to die. In the following weeks, Rex couldn't shake the strange occurrences. Late at night, while resting at various truck stops, he would sometimes hear his cab radio crackle to life with that same haunting phrase, "You shouldn't be here," even though he had long since changed channels. He began to document his encounters, jotting down notes in a battered journal kept on the dashboard, a journal that spoke of eerie sightings, inexplicable sounds, and the lingering sensation of being perpetually followed by something unseen. He even started to send these accounts to a few old contacts on the CB, drivers who swore that they, too, had seen spectral rigs and ghostly figures on lonely highways. One such night, as Rex navigated a particularly desolate stretch of interstate, a heavy, impenetrable fog rolled in without warning. His headlights sputtered and then illuminated, in the distance, the unmistakable form of a truck that bore the telltale signs of age and neglect. This time, it wasn't a fleeting vision. There was a solidity to it. The truck appeared to be moving slowly against the tide of traffic, its tail lights flickering like dying embers. Rex slowed down, uncertain whether to maintain speed or to follow. He decided to pull over at a safe distance behind the phantom rig, watching as it drifted along the shoulder, its engine's roar sounding like a lament. Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sound the low rumble of the mysterious truck's engine. Then, as if aware of his observation, it veered slightly and rolled to a stop. Rex's heart hammered in his chest as he turned off his engine and listened. Out of the fog came a voice, gravelly, filled with sorrow and regret. "I'm still here. Remember me." It was unmistakable, echoing through the hum of the silent night. Rex sat frozen, grappling with the overwhelming weight of memories he never knew he shared with the dead. The voice wasn't threatening. It was a sorrowful benediction from a past he couldn't ignore. A reminder that the highway was more than steel and asphalt, that it was a repository for every lost soul and every shattered dream. Slowly, as if guided by a force beyond reason, Rex restarted his rig. With one last look in the rearview mirror, where the phantom truck had vanished into the swirling mist, he pressed on. All the while, the voice lingered in his mind, a persistent whisper urging him to reconcile with the ghosts of the road, to remember not only the tragedies that had passed, but also the lives entwined with those dark moments. From that day forward, Rex carried his journal as both a record and a talisman. Every mile he logged, every encounter with the inexplicable, every time he heard that chilling refrain in the back of his cab, he wrote it down. His notes became a testament to a hidden world where past and present collided on deserted highways, where the tragic echoes of lost lives begged for remembrance. In his own quiet way, Rex began to see that the strange events were not simply curses or mere superstitions. They were the road's way of mourning, of keeping alive the memory of those who'd been forgotten. The further he drove, the more he found solace in knowing that he was part of something larger, a chain of souls bound together by the shared experience of loss, regret, and the longing for redemption. Late one frosty winter morning, as Rex was pulling into a familiar truck stop near a sprawling network of rail yards, he caught sight of an old billboard faded by time. It read simply, "Remember me." He stared at it for a long moment, the words resonating deep within him. In that instant, he understood that every ghost, every whisper in the static, every spectral truck he'd seen was a call, a plea for someone to remember, to acknowledge, to give peace to restless souls. And through his own story, he might just help those voices finally be heard. As seasons turned and his logs grew thicker, Rex's legend began to spread among the trucking community. Other drivers started to share their own accounts of phantom rigs, eerie voices, and highways that seemed to remember too much. Their stories, fragmented yet united by a common thread, painted a picture of a world beyond the ordinary, one where the road held power and where every mile was steeped in the memories of lives once lived. Rex often wondered about the hitchhiker he'd met that fateful night on the unlit lane. He never saw him again, though sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, when the road was as empty as a forgotten grave, he'd catch a glimpse of a lone figure by the roadside. A reminder that sometimes, even on the longest journeys, You cannot outrun the ghosts of your past. And so Rex drove on, each journey a tribute to all those lost souls, his heart carrying the weight of the stories that would not let him forget. Years later, when Rex finally retired his rig and hung up the worn leather cap that had seen so many midnight miles, his journals were compiled and shared among the community of drivers. They served as both cautionary tales and relics of a life entwined with the haunting roads of America, a lasting testament to the hidden truths that lay beyond the flickering glow of dashboard lights. For in every rumble of an engine and every whisper in a lonely cab, there was a voice crying out from beyond, urging everyone to remember that the road was never truly empty.
Story number 8.
The ancient pines whispered like anxious souls as the group of campers gathered around a crackling fire on the edge of Blackwater Lake. The night was thick with humidity and a persistent fog that seemed to creep in from the water, cloaking the surrounding forest in a heavy, unyielding silence. Among the group were 3 close friends: Megan, a determined investigative journalist with an unquenchable curiosity; Tyler, a pragmatic mechanic whose skepticism was only outmatched by his loyalty; and Jasmine, whose gentle warmth and quiet insight often belied a profound understanding of that defied logic. They had come to this remote spot, a place locals called the Vale, to embrace nature, to break free of city life, and to test the old camping lore that whispered of inexplicable happenings when the darkness reigned supreme. As twilight surrendered to midnight, Megan led the conversation, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You know," she began, voice low and almost conspiratorial, "my research uncovered some disturbing stories about this very area. Old-timers say that years ago, a group of campers vanished without a trace, and they say that something in these woods still roams, something that preys on those who venture too deep into the darkness." Tyler scoffed, grinning despite the chill that crept up his spine. "Ghost stories, Meg? Come on. We're out here to have fun, not scare ourselves silly. It's just a bunch of superstition." Yet, even as he laughed, his gaze flicked warily at the dense tree line beyond the firelight. Jasmine, quiet until now, added softly, "But I've also heard the whispers. There's something unsettling in the wind here, like it carries voices from a long-forgotten past. Maybe it's just the rustle of the trees, but sometimes it sounds like footsteps in the dark." Her tone was not one of fear, but of reflective sorrow, a lament for secrets buried too deep in the earth. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by an unexpected sound, a distant snapping of twigs that seemed to come from the direction of the lake. The fire crackled louder for a heartbeat as all eyes turned toward the dim outline of the forest. Tyler's smile faded as he muttered, "Probably just a deer." But Megan wasn't convinced. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. It sounded too deliberate, like someone or something was watching us. The night deepened, and as the conversation dwindled into uneasy silence, the trio decided to settle into their respective tents. Each of them carried their own apprehensions, though they tried to dismiss the odd noises as merely the peculiar acoustics of an old forest. Still, a disquieting feeling clung to the damp earth beneath their feet. At around 2 a.m., Megan awoke to a soft rustle outside her tent. Her heart pounded in a rhythm that mimicked the relentless drip of condensation on the tent's ceiling. With a trembling hand, she unzipped a small opening and peered out into the obsidian darkness. Shadows moved among the trees, but it wasn't the scurrying of small animals. It was as if an elongated figure wandered slowly near the campsite. Just as she considered calling Tyler, a faint voice, barely audible over the rustling leaves, called her name. "Megan, please." The sound was fragile, laced with despair, and made her blood run cold. She pulled the flap closed and lay back, wide-eyed, listening as the sound dwindled into a haunting echo. Not long after, Tyler was roused from a fitful slumber by an insistent tapping on his tent. Groggy and annoyed, he unfastened the flap and flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness to reveal only the swaying trunks of trees and the sparse undergrowth. But as he scanned the perimeter, he noticed a series of fresh footprints leading away from his tent, imprinted clearly in the soft, damp soil. The prints were small and oddly deliberate, as if belonging to a child, and then they abruptly disappeared into the thick brush. "What the?" Tyler muttered to himself as he crouched to inspect them. His mind raced between rational explanations, a stray animal perhaps, and the possibility that something far more sinister was at work. Meanwhile, Jasmine, unable to sleep after hearing muffled whispers just beyond her tent, stepped quietly into the cool night air. Wrapped in a worn flannel blanket, she wandered toward the lake, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The silver light of the moon danced on the surface of the water, creating ethereal ripples that seemed to call out to her with a ghostly promise. As she reached the water's edge, the faint murmur of voices grew clearer. They interwove with the sound of lapping water in a melancholy cadence that sent shivers down her spine. "Please, remember us," the voices whispered, almost too softly to catch. Jasmine's breath hitched, her instinct a mix of compassion and dread. Had these voices been waiting for someone to notice them? She reached out as if to embrace the sound, but the moment passed, leaving behind only the echo of their plea and an inescapable sense of profound loss. At dawn, as the first feeble rays of light began to pale the darkness, the trio reconvened around the dying embers of the fire. Megan was the first to speak, her voice resolute despite the tremor of residual fear. "Something happened last night, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something trying to get through to us. I heard my name, and it wasn't just in my head, it was real." Her eyes, shining with determination, searched the faces of her friends for validation. Tyler, ever the skeptic, simply rubbed his eyes and shook his head. "It was probably the wind and the pressure of the forest playing tricks on your mind, Meg. We're all tired. I mean, I found footprints outside my tent, tiny ones, like a child's, but maybe an animal made them." His tone was measured, yet the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his disbelief. Even he could not fully dismiss the strangeness of the night. Jasmine, cradling her warm mug of coffee, remained silent for a long moment before speaking. "I don't think it was an animal, or even just the wind. There's a sorrow there, a desperate longing that isn't natural. I heard voices calling out from the lake. They said, 'Remember us, remember us,' in a way that sounded like more than just echoes." Her eyes flickered with a hidden pain, as though she were privy to secrets that the rest of them could only guess at. The conversation turned to the local legends of the area. Megan had done her research and remembered reading about a tragic event that took place decades ago near Blackwater Lake. A small group of campers, lured by the promise of a perfect getaway, had vanished without a trace one stormy night. The case was never solved, and over time, the locals began to talk about the lost ones and how the forest reclaimed them, binding their souls to the land. According to the stories, on certain nights, especially when the mist was thick and the moon was hidden, the vanished would call out, hoping that someone would remember their names. Some even claimed that the area around Blackwater Lake was cursed, a place where the boundary between life and death was perilously thin. As the discussion deepened, an uneasy silence descended upon the group. Megan's investigative instincts flared. She was determined to uncover the truth and document these paranormal encounters, even if it meant confronting a darkness that defied explanation. "I'm going to set up a recorder tonight," she announced, her tone firm. "If there's something here, if these voices truly belong to the lost souls of this place, we'll capture it. We owe it to them to know their story." Tyler's skepticism wavered in the face of Megan's resolve. "Be careful, Meg," he warned. "Some things are better left alone. I don't want any of us getting caught up in something we can't handle." Even though his words were laced with practicality, his eyes betrayed a hint of fear. A fear that perhaps there were forces in the darkness beyond human reckoning. Jasmine reached out and took Megan's hand gently. "I think we need to remember, not just them but ourselves too. Sometimes the past haunts us because we refuse to acknowledge it. Perhaps what we're hearing is not a curse, but a plea for us to learn from it, to remember the pain so that we might prevent it from repeating." Her voice was soft, almost sorrowful, yet it carried the weight of someone who had seen too much sorrow to be complacent. That night, as the group settled back into their makeshift camp beneath the dense canopy, the atmosphere crackled with tension and anticipation. Megan placed her recorder on a flat rock near the edge of the fire and sat down, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Tyler stayed close, his gaze darting between the trees, while Jasmine sat a little apart, her expression distant and thoughtful. Hours passed in a lull, punctuated only by the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional call of a distant owl. Then, as the clock edged toward midnight, a change came over the campsite. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the thick fog began to roll in with an almost tangible heaviness. The fire sputtered and dimmed, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to merge with the darkness beyond. And then the whispers began. At first, they were so soft that the sound might have been mistaken for the natural chorus of night, leaves rustling, branches swaying. But then the voices grew distinct. They carried a sorrowful tone, pleading for something lost. Remember us. Remember us. They echoed through the trees in a mournful cadence, as if coming from deep within the earth itself. Megan's heart thudded as she listened intently. Tyler? Jasmine? She called out softly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. The others remained silent, their eyes wide as they strained to catch the source of the lament. The whispers swelled into a chorus of spectral voices, all identical in their desperate refrain. The recorder, left running on the rock, captured every fractured note. Suddenly, amid the ghostly chorus, one clear voice emerged, a child's voice, fragile and heartbroken. I'm lost. Please help me. It sent a shudder through Megan, and she reached out as if to grasp the ephemeral sound. Tyler rose abruptly, his face set in grim determination. This isn't just a trick of the wind, he muttered. There's something here that wants us to listen. He stepped away from the fire toward the thicker part of the forest, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the fog as he scanned for movement. Show yourself, he commanded, half mocking and half demanding, his voice echoing unnervingly in the still night. For a prolonged moment, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged from behind a gnarled oak, a small, gaunt child clad in dirt-smudged clothes, eyes hollow yet brimming with sorrow. The child's lips moved silently at first, then, as if plucking courage from the overwhelming despair, the voice repeated, I'm lost. Please help me. The sight was heart-wrenching, a living reminder of all that had been forgotten, of tragedies too deep to be mended. Megan's instinct as a journalist burned. Who are you? She asked softly, stepping forward despite the pounding in her chest. The child's eyes met hers, large, reflective pools that held centuries of loneliness. I can't remember. The voice stuttered, barely audible. They took my name. They took everything. The admission was like a promise of hidden pain, and it compelled the trio to circle around the child, offering silent comfort even as fear knotted their hearts. Tyler's skepticism melted into concern as he knelt down. Who did this to you, kid? He asked gently, his rough voice softened by genuine care. But the child's form shuddered, as if stricken by the mere touch of truth. With a fleeting glance at Megan, the child murmured, You must remember us before it's too late. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the child dissolved into a swirl of mist and fading echoes, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sorrow in the air. The camp fell into a heavy silence. The recorder continued to capture the soft, broken lament of the voices, blending with the natural sounds of the forest. Megan's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she reached for her notebook. We have to find out what happened here, she said, her voice quiet and determined. These voices, they're not just stories. They're cries for help from souls abandoned to the darkness. Jasmine, her voice barely a whisper, replied, Perhaps by remembering them we can give them peace. Maybe. Maybe it's not a curse, but a chance for redemption. She wiped away a tear, her expression set in a mixture of sorrow and resolve. In the coming days, as dawn broke over a forest slowly emerging from the grip of night, the trio painstakingly followed the clues left behind by the whispered voices. They discovered fragments of old journals, half buried in the underbrush near a forgotten trail. The pages detailed the lives of a family of campers who had arrived at Blackwater Lake decades ago, seeking solace in nature. But an unexpected and violent storm had swept through, leaving them stranded and eventually lost, a tragedy that had been hushed up over the years. The journals spoke of desperate attempts to hold on to hope, of names and promises made in the dark, and of a lingering regret that seemed to tether their souls to the spot. As Megan transcribed the painful words by the light of a lantern in the chilly morning air, Tyler's practical mind pieced together the physical evidence: a broken compass, a faded photograph of a smiling family, and a locket containing 3 names now nearly illegible. Each item resonated with the same message the voices had repeated. Remember me. Remember us. They began to realize that the phenomenon was rooted in a deep, unhealed wound, a tragedy that had never been given proper mourning or closure. The trio agreed that the only way to ease the tortured voices was to honor the memory of those lost. In a solemn, impromptu ceremony at the edge of Blackwater Lake, Under a sky slowly brightening with the first hints of sunrise, they read aloud the names from the journal, pledging to keep their memories alive and to share their untold story with the world. The wind carried their voices across the water, and for a brief, almost sacred moment, the forest seemed to exhale a long-held breath of relief. That night, as they packed up their modest camp and prepared to leave the clearing, Megan reviewed the recordings and her notes with a quiet reverence. The haunting sounds captured that fateful night were now not just eerie phenomena. They were testimonies of lives unlived, of pleas for remembrance that had finally found a voice. Although the chilling echoes of Remember Us still reverberated in the recesses of her mind, they now carried an undercurrent of hope. Hope that in acknowledging the forgotten, healing might finally begin. As the trio drove away, the mist lifting slowly behind them, each felt the weight of their experience in different ways. Tyler's pragmatic heart had learned to accept that sometimes the inexplicable was real, beyond the domain of logic and mechanics. Jasmine's gentle spirit had been both wounded and soothed by the encounter. Her compassion deepened by the realization that every soul, no matter how lost, yearns to be remembered. And Megan, with her unwavering dedication to the truth, resolved to write the story of Blackwater Lake, a story of tragedy, ghostly pleas, and ultimately redemption through remembrance. In the months and years that followed, Megan's article became a quiet legend among camping enthusiasts and locals alike. Her account, meticulously detailed and imbued with raw emotion, wasn't just about a haunted forest. It was about the unbreakable bond between the living and those who had passed on without proper farewell. And whenever campfires burned on chilly nights in those remote woods, someone would inevitably speak the words that had once been whispered in the dark. Remember me, remember us. A call to honor the past so that its sorrow might finally be at peace. For those who dare to venture into the wilderness and listen closely to the rustling trees and lapping waters, there remains the enduring truth that every lost soul, every untold story, and every silent cry for acknowledgement finds a way to echo in the hearts of those who remember. And so, under the endless canvas of starlit skies and the timeless whisper of the wind, the legacy of Blackwater Lake endures. An eternal reminder that in remembering, we give hope and solace to those who might otherwise be forever forgotten.
Story number 9.
Officer Daniel Danny Reyes had been on the force for nearly 2 decades, and he'd seen his fair share of oddities on the city streets. But nothing had prepared him for the night that reshaped his understanding of fear and duty. It began like any other shift in the cramped, rain-soaked precinct of Westbridge, a city with a murky past and secrets best left buried. But as midnight approached, a series of inexplicable events drew him into a nightmare that blurred the lines between duty and the unexplainable. Danny was the type of cop who believed in facts and evidence. He liked his coffee black and his nights predictable. Yet on that stormy evening, as the neon glow of streetlights bled into puddles on slick asphalt, his radio crackled with transmissions that defied explanation. The dispatcher's voice, usually calm and businesslike, came through in a strained whisper. All units respond to 452 Hawthorne Avenue. Possible disturbance. Repeat, possible disturbance. Danny's pulse quickened as he snapped on his coat and headed toward his cruiser, joining his partner, Officer Michelle Harper, who had already been en route. The address led them to a dilapidated warehouse district on the outskirts of Westbridge. The building at 452 Hawthorne Avenue loomed like a specter among the rusting trucks and abandoned machinery. Its windows were dark, its facades scarred by decades of neglect, and a heavy mist clung to the area like a shroud. Danny's instincts screamed for caution, and even Michelle, normally unflappable, tightened her grip on her flashlight as they approached. A low hum of static permeated the silence between them, interrupted only by the occasional drip of rain from broken eaves. Michelle radioed in, "We're here, dispatcher. No obvious signs of struggle, just a strong sense of something off." Her voice wavered slightly, and Danny could almost hear an unspoken question in it. What exactly was wrong with the building? Inside, the corridor was dim and lined with peeling, faded wallpaper that seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own. Danny's flashlight swept over dusty crates and scattered debris. The air was thick and heavy, nearly suffocating in its musty grip. Then, in the far end of the hallway, they heard a sound, a soft, pitiful murmur like someone crying quietly. Their training urged them to call for backup, but something made Danny hesitate, an inexplicable pull to investigate further. "Michelle, stay close," Danny said with controlled determination, his voice echoing slightly in the hollow space. "I'm going to check that sound." Michelle nodded, her eyes already scanning the shadows, every fiber of her being alert. Danny advanced slowly toward the source of the noise, each step measured. The murmur grew clearer, the plaintive utterance of what sounded like a person's name, repeated over and over. "Save me. Help me." The words were choked with despair, and with every step, Danny could feel an oppressive gloom pressing in on him. His hand rested on his holstered sidearm as he reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a room bathed in a sickly yellow light that seemed to pulse unnaturally. Drawing on years of experience, Danny pushed the door open carefully. The room was small and sparse, furnished with a single battered cot and a rickety desk. On the wall hung a frayed photograph of a young woman with wide, sorrowful eyes. The murmuring voice came from beneath the desk as if hidden in a dark recess. Danny knelt and peered under the desk, and there, trembling, was a man. A look of terror etched into every line of his face. His uniform was torn and stained, but it wasn't a police uniform. It was outdated, ragged, as though from a long-forgotten era. "Officer, please, help me," the man gasped, his voice ragged with panic. His eyes flickered between hope and deep, hidden horror. They're coming for us all." For a moment, time seemed to slow. Danny reached out a steadying hand. "Hey, it's okay, I'm here. Who are you?" The man's answer was barely audible. I was part of the unit before the night changed everything." His eyes haunted Danny with unspeakable sorrow and an urgency that hinted at a terrible secret. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Danny's heart pounded as he helped the man to his feet. "Come with me. We need to get you out of here," he ordered, his voice low and authoritative. But as they turned to leave, the corridor behind them darkened imperceptibly. Michelle's voice came from the hallway. "Danny, did you hear that? There's something in the back." The tension in her tone was unmistakable. At that moment, the radio in Danny's hand burst into static. Amid the noise, a distorted voice tried to speak. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't. Remember me." Danny's grip tightened on the radio as he looked from the frightened man to Michelle, whose eyes had widened in alarm. "I'm not sure what this is, but we need to get out now," he urged quietly. The man clutched his chest as if gripped by an unseen terror. As they hurried back toward the exit, Danny's footsteps echoed on the worn floor, and every shadow in the corridor seemed to writhe with malevolent intent. Once outside, into the lashing rain and howling wind, the three of them, Danny, Michelle, and the mysterious man, stood under the weak beam of a street lamp. The rain washed away the grime from the building's facade, revealing graffiti scrawled in desperate haste. "Remember the fallen, they never left." Danny's mind raced. Who was this man? What had happened that night in this forsaken warehouse? And what was the meaning of that incomprehensible plea on the radio? Before Danny could speak further, the man's voice quavered. "We were a team, a police team, sent here to bury our mistakes, to cover up what really happened." His words were rushed, heavy with guilt and fear. "It wasn't a robbery, it was an ambush. We, my unit, was ambushed in the field, and then something changed. I barely escaped. They say the dead don't leave. They come back. I've seen them, in the static, in the shadows." Michelle exchanged a glance with Danny, a shared look of disbelief mixed with dread. "What do you mean the dead don't leave?" Danny pressed, his voice now laced with an edge of desperation. The man's eyes dropped to the pavement, as if overwhelmed by the weight of his own confession. "We did what we were told. We covered it up, and then those who were left behind, they're not at rest. They became something else, something hungry." His words spilled out in a rapid, almost incoherent stream. "I was one of the few survivors. I thought I could run, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard them calling out, 'Remember me, remember me.' It's a curse on us all." The implications of his confession struck Danny like a blow. The night's events were merging with the dark corners of old urban legends. Stories of police units caught in ambushes, buried secrets, and restless souls determined to exact their toll. "We need to report this," Danny murmured, though his internal voice warred with the dread that something beyond human malice had stirred inside him. Michelle's voice trembled as she interjected, "But if we report it, If we expose what happened, we might open a wound that never heals, not just for us, but for everyone who's lost their life in the line of duty. Her words carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had lived with tragedy long enough to know that some truths were best left unspoken. Danny hesitated. The thought of reopening old wounds, of dredging up the painful past that haunted the department for decades, was almost unbearable. Yet as a cop, he'd always believed that the truth was the only path to redemption. They decided to take the mysterious man to a safe location, an isolated motel on the outskirts of Westbridge, where Danny could call in backup and secure the evidence without interference. In the sterile glow of the motel room, while rain hammered on the window panes, the man's story unfolded in chilling detail. He told them that his name was Lieutenant Harold Kent, and that on a cold night many years ago, his unit had responded to a high-risk raid on a drug lab. The operation had spiraled into chaos when an armed ambush hit them. In the ensuing firefight, nearly every officer was killed. Kent had managed to escape, but not before witnessing something so horrifying, an unnatural, shifting presence among the dead bodies, as if the souls of his fallen comrades had been twisted into vengeful shadows. In the aftermath, the higher-ups had suppressed the incident. They buried the truth under layers of official silence and classified reports. But Harold could never escape what he witnessed. Now, years later, those ghosts had returned in subtle ways, manifesting on that fateful night and through a radio transmission that still haunted him. Danny listened, his jaw clenched, while Michelle's eyes shone with a mix of pity and determination. "We have to do something," Danny whispered fiercely. "If the department never speaks of this, then these souls and our memories are doomed to wander forever, dragging us down with them." Harold's grip on his arms tightened. "It's too late for some," he said in a broken tone. "They're out there, beyond redemption, their voices echoing in the static, and if you disturb the truth now, it might awaken something that can't be contained." Over the next several days, Danny and Michelle began their own covert investigation, balancing on a knife's edge between duty and an almost obsessive quest for closure. With Harold's trembling testimony as a guide, they visited old battlegrounds of that tragic ambush, speaking with retired officers who hesitated before sharing their own suppressed memories. In the archives of the precinct, they unearthed a series of disjointed reports, a faded photograph of a unit in formation, scattered notes hinting at abnormal occurrences on that icy night, and a confidential memo referencing persistent auditory hallucinations among survivors. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that something in Westbridge's past was clawing its way into the present, latching onto those who sought the truth. One quiet evening, as Danny drove back to his apartment after a long day of sifting through dusty files, the radio in his cruiser crackled violently. For a heartbeat, the words remember me," came through in a voice that was both familiar and impossibly mournful. Danny slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding like a war drum. He stared at the dark road ahead, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching him. Then, in a flash, a pair of headlights appeared far in the distance. As he slowed, the vehicle became clearer. It was an old patrol car, its blue lights erratic in the storm of his thoughts. But something was off. The car's engine sputtered as if struggling against an unseen force, and its form seemed to waver in the darkness like a mirage. Danny's hand trembled as he turned on his siren, even though he knew this wasn't a routine call. The patrol car slowed, stopped, and then, with a sudden lurch, vanished into the black as though it had never existed. Danny's mind reeled. Was it a hallucination spurred by exhaustion, or had the ghosts of that long-ago ambush come calling again? The following morning, as an uneasy calm settled over Westbridge, Danny and Michelle met in a dimly lit diner near the precinct. They reviewed their notes, their faces etched with both determination and the toll of sleepless nights. Michelle broke the silence. "Danny, sometimes I wonder if we're chasing shadows, but every time that radio message comes through, every time I feel that cold sweat, I know there's something we can't ignore." Danny nodded. "This isn't just about closure or redemption. It's about ensuring that those fallen aren't forever condemned to whisper their regrets through our systems, haunting us as long as their stories remain untold." They agreed to compile their findings and present them to the internal affairs boards, despite the risk of reopening old wounds. The truth, however painful, needed to be acknowledged. Their report was meticulous, an unvarnished account of a night when a unit was ambushed, of suppressed evidence and ghosts that clung to the very air of Westbridge. Yet even as they prepared to turn over their dossier, unexplained occurrences persisted. Late one night, while Danny was alone in his office poring over case files, the fluorescent lights began to flicker, and the hum of the old wiring seemed to swell into a chorus of voices. Among them, unmistakably, was the plaintive refrain, "Remember me, remember me." Danny froze, every instinct screaming at him to run, yet paralyzed by the raw, unbearable grief emanating from the sound. The lights steadied after a moment, leaving him in an oppressive silence once more. Danny scribbled down every detail, conscious now that he was no longer just a policeman, but a custodian of truths that many wished forgotten. His world had expanded beyond the tangible evidence of broken glass and rain-soaked streets to the intangible realm of regrets and restless souls. In the months that followed, the investigation shook the foundations of the precinct. The internal affairs inquiry led to painful revelations. Records were corrected, and long-suppressed testimonies finally saw the light of day. The stories of that tragic night were recounted by trembling veterans whose voices turned hoarse with sorrow. The department began to confront its past mistakes, and a memorial was established in honor of those lost that fateful day. And yet, for Danny and Michelle, the strange occurrences never entirely ceased. Late at night, in the quiet moments between the steady buzz of streetlights and the darkness of the city's forgotten alleys, the forlorn echoes of "Remember Me" persisted. They were no longer viewed as mere hauntings, but as solemn calls for acknowledgement, a reminder that the past never truly dies if it is hidden away in silence. On a chilly evening, as Danny drove home along an empty road, he paused at a lookout point where the city's lights melted into the encroaching darkness. He sat quietly for a long time, the engine idling as he reflected on everything that had transpired, a mosaic of pain, duty, and the unyielding pull of memories that demanded remembrance. In that silent vigil, he felt a presence beside him, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur on the wind, as if many voices joined together in one final plea. "Remember us. Remember us." The words were both a lament and a benediction. Danny closed his eyes and whispered back, "I remember," knowing that in that simple admission lay the hope that the restless might finally find peace. For Danny Reyes, the line between the living and the dead had blurred irrevocably. His badge and his duty no longer shielded him from the weight of history. Instead, they bound him to the legacy of those whose voices echoed in the static of every unanswered call and every flicker of a malfunctioning light. In his continued service to Westbridge, he carried the memory of that doomed night with him, a reminder that the price of silence can be far higher than any arrest or citation. And so every time he heard the familiar cadence of that forlorn whisper, he answered with a quiet vow that no tragedy would be forgotten on his watch.
Story number 10.
The summer heat had barely faded from Willow's End, a sleepy, unassuming small town that sat tucked away in a dusty valley, when whispers began to circulate. At first, it was subtle. A few odd glances exchanged over white picket fences, murmurs of strange lights in the abandoned mill, and a pervasive sense of being watched by something unseen. But as the days lengthened into one simmering, oppressive week, the town's veneer of placid normalcy began to crumble, revealing deep, long-buried secrets and an unshakable dread that seeped into every corner of its existence. Mara Ellis, a determined young reporter from the regional paper, had come to Willow's End in search of a human interest story, one that would capture the rustic charm of a small town and its close-knit community. What she found instead was a cold gust of terror that would shake her beliefs about the comfort of ordinary life. Arriving in town on a dusty afternoon, Mara was struck by the eerie stillness that clung to the streets. The main thoroughfare, lined with neat storefronts and faded neon signs, appeared deserted. A heavy silence hung in the air like a shroud, punctuated only by the occasional creak of an old swing in the overgrown park. Her first stop was the local diner, a hub for half-forgotten stories and the epicenter of small-town gossip. Inside, the battered vinyl booths and dim lighting exuded a nostalgic charm that felt more like a trap than a refuge. The few locals gathered at a counter, turned their attention to Mara with guarded curiosity as she introduced herself. "Ma'am, I'm Mara Ellis from the Daily Chronicle. I'm writing about Willow's End's history and the stories that make this town unique. Would you mind sharing what you know?" she asked, leaning forward with a friendly smile. An older woman named Elsie, whose eyes were as tired as they were sharp, offered a crooked smile. "Unique, dear? Well, there's more to Willow's End than meets the eye. Our town's got its share of happenings. Folks say that every so often things occur, things that no one in their right mind would admit to. But sometimes they just can't hide it forever." Mara scribbled notes as Elsie continued in a hushed tone. "They say it all started in the winter of '72 when the old Thompson farm burned down overnight. Some thought they saw a figure moving in the flames, and the next day people began disappearing. Not all at once, but one by one, as if the town itself were cleaning house of those who'd done wrong. And later, you hear the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow long after a storm's passed, or catch a glimpse of a pale face in the window of an abandoned house." That story, told with a mix of sorrow and apprehension, sent a chill through Mara despite the humid air. She asked, "Have you experienced anything yourself?" Elsie hesitated, glancing around as though fearful of unseen ears. "There's something out there, young lady. It's like a presence, a memory. I sometimes hear voices in the dead of night, calling out names of long-gone neighbors, and on moonless nights when the wind is still, the old oak by the cemetery, it seems to weep." With that, she patted Mara's hand and whispered, "Be careful what you dig up, dear. Some stones are best left unturned." That night, Mara returned to her modest rented room above a creaking boarding house on the edge of town. She lay awake, the sound of a relentless cicada drone mingling with the distant murmur of something like a lament. Unable to sleep, she decided to take a walk through the silent streets, hoping that the cool night air might dispel her unsettling thoughts. Under a sky cloaked in thick black clouds, she passed by shuttered shops and empty sidewalks. At the far end of the main street, the abandoned Thompson farm loomed, a smoldering skeleton of a building, its charred timbers sagging like broken promises. Mara's curiosity led her to the site. The burned-out structure was cordoned off by yellow tape, but as she approached, a sensation of being watched prickled her skin. Every fiber in her body warned her to turn back. Yet she pressed on, camera in hand to document what the locals had described so vividly. Near the remnants of a collapsed barn, she found footprints pressed into the soft earth, a set of prints that seemed to fade into nothingness at the edge of the property. The sound of a distant whisper, indistinct yet sorrowful, made her stop in her tracks. "Remember us," it seemed to say, carried on a wind that chilled her to the bone. Determined not to succumb to fear, Mara returned to the diner the next morning with her photographs and notes. There, she encountered Sheriff Adam Baker, a hard-bitten, methodical man with a gruff exterior and eyes that had seen too much. He was known to be both respected and quietly haunted by the town's tragedies. Mara introduced herself again in the familiar, careful tone she used when questioning locals. "Sheriff Baker, I'm working on a story about Willow's End's history. I was wondering if you could tell me about the old Thompson fire and the disappearances that followed. People say there's something unnatural about it all." Baker's jaw tightened as he sighed deeply before speaking. "You want the real story, huh? There was a time in the winter of '72 when this town thought it had been cursed. We lost some good people in that fire, not just on the Thompson farm, but others too. Folks went missing without a trace, and it wasn't long before rumors started. I've been on this beat for 30 years, and I've seen what these little towns can hide, and believe me, Willow's End harbors secrets that don't want to be found." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "I remember one case, a young man named Bobby Haynes. He'd been a promising kid, but after that winter, he disappeared one night while returning from a friend's house. His jacket was found near the old cemetery, but he was never seen again. The case went cold, but sometimes on the coldest nights, people claim they hear a man calling out in despair from among the tombstones. I dismissed it at first, but then I started to notice more. Strange tire tracks, odd sounds in the night, a feeling of dread that clings to you like bad cologne. And every so often, a report comes in from someone who swears they've seen a figure standing in the woods, watching, waiting." Mara studied the lines of Baker's face, etched by years of hardship. Do you believe in these ghost stories? Sheriff Baker's eyes softened a bit as he responded, I believe in what I've seen. And in this town, sometimes the evidence isn't on paper or in a video. It's in the collective memory of its people. They remember the day things changed. They remember the lives lost. And sometimes they think that if you don't remember, the souls are lost forever. That evening, driven by an inner compulsion to uncover every hidden truth, Mara followed Baker's advice. She ventured to the town cemetery, a sprawling plot of weathered headstones and ancient trees shrouded in mist. The cemetery was silent, except for the occasional rustle of dead leaves scuttling across uneven ground. As she moved along a narrow path between the graves, she could almost hear soft whispers that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, voices murmuring names that she struggled to discern. In a secluded corner stood an enormous old oak, its gnarled branches twisting upward as though in silent supplication. Mara's flashlight flickered as she drew near. Remember, remember, the wind whispered again, carrying with it a despair that chilled her to her core. She reached out tentatively, pressing a hand to the rough bark, and for a moment felt as if 1,000 unseen eyes bore into her soul. It was then that she noticed a small, weathered box tucked into a hollow near the roots. Inside, she found a collection of faded photographs, a diary with brittle pages, and a single lock of hair that looked unnervingly familiar, like it belonged to one of the town's long missing residents. The diary's entries were written in a hurried scrawl, recounting the final days of a family who had sought refuge on the Thompson farm. Their words were filled with fear and sorrow, describing how they had seen strange lights in the sky, how the forest seemed to awaken with unholy life at night, and how one by one their loved ones had vanished. The final entry ended abruptly with a single desperate plea, please remember us before it's too late. Mara's hands trembled as she realized that this was the legacy of the old curse, a call for remembrance that transcended time and death. She could almost sense the presence of those lost souls, their pain and longing coiled tightly around each word. Determined to give voice to the forgotten, she resolved to compile everything she had discovered into a comprehensive story, a story that would forever change the way Willow's End was remembered, both by its living and its dead. In the days that followed, Mara sat with locals at town meetings, in the back rooms of the diner, and even in the privacy of her own modest study, painstakingly piecing together accounts of the uncanny events. She listened to haunted recollections from elderly men who recalled seeing spectral figures among the trees, from widows who wept for partners lost under mysterious circumstances, and from children who spoke of a weeping tree in the cemetery that wept real tears on moonless nights. With each story, the tapestry grew richer and darker. It was as if the very soul of Willow's End had been etched into the memories of its inhabitants, a constant reminder that some tragedies never fade away. One evening, as a violent summer thunderstorm rattled the town, Mara found herself at the diner once more. Sheriff Baker was there, his face somber in the flickering light of a television that broadcast only static. "You've stirred up the past, Mara," he said gravely as she approached. "There are forces at work here that might not appreciate their secrets being unearthed." His voice carried an edge of warning, but also a hint of resignation. "I've always believed that in a town like this, the dead have as much right to be remembered as the living. But sometimes the spirits don't want to be disturbed. They're angry, lost, and desperate." Mara's reply was quiet, but unwavering. "I understand, Sheriff, but silence only condemns them to oblivion. And those memories, no matter how painful, are a part of who we are. We have to face them, acknowledge them, so that maybe one day we can finally heal." Baker nodded, his eyes reflecting a sorrow he could no longer hide, and the conversation fell into a heavy, reflective silence that was only interrupted by the sound of ramming on the diner's roof. The story of Willow's End soon spread beyond the confines of the small town. Mara's articles, published in the Daily Chronicle, sparked debates among academics, paranormal enthusiasts, and locals alike. Her meticulously documented accounts of ghostly voices, haunted landmarks, and long-forgotten tragedies turned the once overlooked town into a reluctant legend. Visitors began to trickle in, each with their own devices and hopes of catching a glimpse of the inexplicable. The old oak in the cemetery, now affectionately dubbed the Weeping Sentinel, became a pilgrimage site where people left mementos and whispered prayers, a silent promise to remember those who had been lost. Despite the newfound attention, the undercurrent of unease in Willow's End never truly abated. At night, when the town lay quiet under a blanket of stars, many still reported hearing the sad refrain echoing through deserted alleys and along the cemetery paths, "Remember us, remember us." Some said that on these nights, the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, and one could almost feel the weight of every soul that had ever called this place home. Mara, now transformed by her experiences, remained a steadfast advocate for the forgotten. While many came to Willow's End searching for a thrill, they found something far more profound, a reminder that every small town harbors hidden scars, and that the stories of pain and loss are as much a part of its identity as its quaint storefronts and friendly smiles. One humid night, months after her initial investigation, Mara received a visit at her modest home on the edge of town. It was Sheriff Baker, his demeanor uncharacteristically grave as he stepped into her living room. "Mara, there's something you should see," he said in a low voice. He produced a battered, sealed envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came in the mail today. It's from a source who claims to have witnessed something extraordinary on the night of the Thompson fire. You need to read it." With a solemn nod, Mara opened the envelope. Inside, she found a handwritten letter in faded ink, accompanied by a photograph of a group of people standing on the front porch of the Thompson farm just hours before the fire. The letter recounted the tale of a desperate attempt to stop what was coming, of a plea from beyond the veil urging them to bear witness to the truth. The signature at the bottom was simple: a friend of the fallen. Tears welled in Mara's eyes as she realized that this was yet another fragment of a story that would never be complete until every voice, every memory was heard. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and the wind carried the spectral whispers of the past, Mara understood that the real horror of Willow's End was not in the phantoms that roamed its streets or the ghostly voices that urged remembrance. It was in the quiet despair of people who had been abandoned by time, forgotten by the world, and left to linger in the shadowy corners of memory. The small town, with its charming facades and friendly greetings, was built upon layers of loss and unspoken secrets. And until those secrets were brought into the light, the ghosts of Willow's End would continue their endless vigil, whispering their timeless plea, "Remember us." In the end, Mara's work transformed the town. Instead of shunning its haunted history, the citizens of Willow's End learned to embrace it, to honor those who had come before them. A memorial was erected near the old oak, and every year on the anniversary of the Thompson fire, the town gathered in quiet reverence. The ritual was simple. Names were read, stories were shared, and for one night, the boundary between the living and the dead softened to a tender murmur of collective remembrance. Mara's articles, her recordings, and her interviews became part of that tradition. Newcomers were warned, not in fear, but in empathy, that small towns, for all their charm, often hold within them tragedies that demand to be acknowledged. And so, under the vast expanse of a starlit sky, as the wind whispered softly through the ancient trees, Willow's End continued to live with its ghosts, a community of the living and the remembered, bound together by a shared legacy of sorrow, hope, and above all, an unyielding promise to never forget.